Hello everyone. Welcome back to another consolidated video in our Azure Administrator Exam Practice Question Series. Today we are diving into questions 165 through 239. That's a whopping 75 questions coming your way. This video is loaded with crucial topics from the AZ-104 exam, so stick around until the end to boost your chances of acing the exam on your first try. And while we are covering 75 questions here, do not forget our full playlist has over 300 questions. So be sure to check out the other parts as well. Now, this is a long video, almost 4 hours. So I recommend taking regular breaks to stay sharp and have your note-taking tools handy so you can quickly review the concepts before the big day. Throughout this video, I'll provide detailed explanation for each question, and where possible, we will jump into the Azure portal for some real-world practical insights. Plus, I'll validate answers by cross-referencing Microsoft documentation so you can be confident in the solutions. Now, friends, for those asking about the PDF version of these questions, yes, we offer PDF through Gold membership of the channel and one-time payment option as well. If you are not comfortable to commit to a channel membership, feel free to reach out to us at devopshub2023@gmail.com for more details around the one-time payment options. And remember, once you have taken the Gold membership, you also need to email us at the same email ID requesting the PDF copy. Now, friends, becoming a member doesn't lock you in, so you can cancel anytime if you feel you have got all the support you need from us. All right, let's dive into today's learning adventure. This is question number 165 of the series. You have an Azure subscription that contains an Azure container registry named contreg1. You enable the admin user for contreg1. Which username can you use to sign into contreg1? Your options are root, admin, administrator, contreg1. Your admin username will be contreg1 in this case. Folks, let's head to Azure portal to create a container registry and check this in real time. Okay, folks, so we are now in Azure portal. Let's try to create a container registry first, and then let's see the admin username. So just select one of the resource group that's available. In the registry name, let's put something which is not available, and let's create it. Running some validations, which should return as good. Yeah, validation is passed. Let's create it. So the deployment is currently in progress. It should be created in just few seconds. Okay, our container registry contreg176746 is now created. Obviously, I had to choose this name because contreg1 was not available due to obvious reasons. Let's go to access keys, and here you can see if you want to enable the admin user, you need to checkbox this checkbox, and basically there you have a message. It says if activated, you can use this registry name as username. So for example, in the question, if the registry name was something else, then username would have been something else. And yeah, this is basically what I wanted to convey to you. Whatever is your registry name is your admin user. Let's try to click on it. And you can see in the username, it's showing contreg176746, and it's displaying the passwords. It has 2 passwords, so you don't really need to worry about these passwords at this point. This is question number 166. You have an Azure subscription that contains a storage account shown in the following table. You have 4 storage accounts named storage 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then their kinds are defined and their performance tiers are defined, and which type of replications they use and which is the access tier that is applicable to you. So storage 1 doesn't have any access tier applicable to it, whereas storage 2 has cool tier and storage 3 and 4 are belonging to hot tier. The storage 1 is storage general purpose V1, whereas storage 2 and storage 3 are storage V2, general purpose V2, and storage 4 is blob storage. The performance of storage 1 and storage 4 is categorized as premium, whereas performance of storage 2 and storage 3 is categorized as standard. And the replication type for three storages, which is storage 1, 2, and 4, is locally redundant storage. And the replication for storage 3 is read access geo-redundant storage, which is RAGRS. Now you need to tell which storage account can be converted to zone redundant storage, which is ZRS replication. Folks, key to answer this question is the storage account needs to be converted to ZRS replication. To understand this, let's head to official Microsoft documentation and see which all factors we need to take into consideration while answering this question. So folks, this is the Microsoft documentation page, which tells you details about how a storage account is replicated and how it can be changed. So let's scroll to the bottom of this page, as there is a table which will give us a bit of detail around what we are trying to achieve in this question. So here it says the following table provides an overview of redundancy options available for storage account types and whether conversion and manual migration are supported. Remember, we are trying to convert to ZRS replication. So ZRS, this is the option, support ZRS, and you can see here standard general purpose V1 does not have a tick, which means standard. If there is a storage kind standard general purpose V1, then it cannot be converted to support ZRS. So that means you can rule out option A here, which is storage 1. Then folks, it doesn't have any references to blob storage. That means storage 4 can also be ruled out because storage 4 was blob storage. Now we are left with option B and option C, which are storage 2 and storage 3. Let's scroll through this page to another set of instruction which will help us in clarifying and eliminating the other option. Yep, so this is the table I was talking about. The following table provides an overview of how to switch from each type of replication to another. The first column of the table shows you are switching from which type of storage replication and switching to which type of storage replication. So you are now switching from, so the two options that are remaining are storage 2 and storage 3. Storage 2 is using locally redundant storage, whereas storage 3 is using RAGRS. So storage 2, which was LRS, you need to switch from LRS to GRS. And you can see it says perform a conversion. That means the conversion is possible. Now, storage 3 was read access geo-redundant storage, which is RAGRS. And for that, to migrate or to convert to ZRS, it says switch to LRS first, then perform a conversion to ZRS. That means it's not a direct conversion, and we will rule out storage 3 and mark storage 2 as the correct choice here. So friends, I now hope you understand why storage 2 has been chosen as the correct choice here based on all the documentation I showed you, and what are the reasons why we have eliminated storage 1, storage 3 and storage 4 here. But if you still have any doubts, please post them in the comment section. Let's look at question number 167. You have an Azure subscription that contains the virtual machines shown in the following table. You have 3 virtual machines named VM1, VM2, VM3, which are located in West Europe, East US, West US. VM1 has 8 virtual CPUs, VM2 has 2 virtual CPUs, VM3 has 12 virtual CPUs. And the generation of VM1 is generation 2, and VM2 and VM3 are first generation VMs. You create an Azure Compute Gallery named Compute Gallery 1 as shown in the Azure Compute Gallery exhibit below. There is an exhibit on your screen. Obviously, you can ignore the subscription. The resource group again can be ignored as they are personal to me. The region is West Europe. The name of the Compute Gallery is Compute Gallery 1. Soft delete is disabled and I do not have any description. Let's look at next part of the question. In Compute Gallery 1, you create a virtual machine image definition named image1 as shown in the exhibit on the right hand side of the screen. Go through the exhibit and then you have some statements and you need to tell whether these statements are right or wrong. So let's first go through the exhibit. The VM image definition region is East US. Again, the target Azure Compute Gallery is Compute Gallery 1. Definition name is image 1. OS type is Windows. Security type is a standard. And you can see VM generation is mentioned as V1, which is first generation. This is one of the critical factors that you will have to take into consideration while answering the questions going forward. The VM architecture is x64, which is 64-bit. Publisher is Contoso, offer is Windows Server 2022, and SKU is Data Center. Now, in the publishing options, most of the options are none, but you need to take into consideration the recommended VM CPUs, which is 4 to 16, and recommended VM memory, which is 1 to 32 GB. Now, the first statement is the operating system disk of VM1 can be used as a source for a version of image1. Look at the VM generation in the screenshot and it says V1, which means it supports generation 1 images. However, VM1 is a generation 2, so an incorrect statement. Let's look at second statement. The operating system disk of VM2 can be used as a source for a version of image1. The statement is correct as both VM generation and the one in VM definition match. Also, the VM definition and source region match. That is why I was telling you that you need to focus on the values selected in the VM image definition and when creating the compute gallery. Let's look at statement 3. The operating system disk of VM1 can be used as a source for a version of image1. For this one, you should notice that region in VM definition is different than VM source, so an incorrect statement. The operating system disk of VM1 cannot be used as a source for a version of image1. Let's look at next question. You have an Azure subscription that contains the container images shown in the following table. You have two images, image1 and image2. Image1 uses Windows Server as its operating system and image2 uses Linux. You plan to use the following services and your services are Azure Container Instances, Azure Container Apps, Azure App Service. In which services can you run the images? And the first one is regarding image1. And your options are Azure Container Instance only, Azure Container Apps only, Azure Container Instances and App Services only, Azure Container Apps and App Services only, Azure Container Instances, Azure Container Apps, and App Services, which is all three options. Folks, let's head to Microsoft documentation of all the services to answer this. Okay, so the first one is the documentation related to Azure Container Instances. Let's scroll down and here you can see Azure Container Instances can schedule both Windows and Linux containers with the same API. You can specify your OS type preference when you create your container groups. That means whether it is image1 or image2, because both of them have a different operating system, you can run these images in Azure Container Instances. Let's now look at Azure Container Apps. So this is again the documentation regarding the Azure Container Apps, and you can see Azure Container App supports any Linux-based x86 and 64 container image with no required base image. Containers from any public or private container registry, sidecar, and init containers. You would notice that there is no mention about Windows images. That means the Azure Container Apps do not support Windows images, so which means you cannot use image1 here. That means for the first question, which was corresponding to image 1, you will not have Azure Container Apps in the valid choices. Let's now look at Azure App Services. Okay, so for Azure App Services, as you can see, Azure App Service is a HTTP-based service for hosting web application, REST APIs, and mobile backends. You can develop in your favorite language, be it .NET, .NET Core, Java, Node.js, PHP, and Python. Applications run and scale with ease on both Windows and Linux-based environments. That means you can run Image 1 and Image 2 in Azure App Service. So folks, based on the documentation which we just went through, you already know that Azure Container Apps cannot be used for Image 1. That means the correct option is Azure Container Instances and App Services only. The next part of this question talks about Image 2. So you would already know by it for Image 2, because it is a Linux-based image, all the three options are valid. That means the fifth option, Azure Container Instances, Azure Container Apps, and App Services are the valid choice in this case. Question number 169. You have a Microsoft Entra tenant named DevOpsHub.com. You have an Azure subscription that contains an Azure App Service web app named App1 and an Azure Key Vault named KV1. KV1 contains a wildcard certificate for DevOpsHub.com. You have a user named user1 at DevOpsHub.com that is assigned the owner role for App1 and KV1. You need to configure App1 to use the wildcard certificate of KB1. What should you do first? Your options are assign a managed user entity to App1, create an access policy for KB1 and assign the Microsoft Azure App Service principal to the policy, create an access policy for KB1 and assign the policy to user1, configure KB1 to use the role-based access control authorization system. And folks, the correct answer is now on your screen, which is option B, create an access policy for KV1 and assign the Microsoft Azure App Service principal to the policy. You first need to create an access policy in the Azure Key Vault, which is KV1, that allows the app service to access the certificates. Access policies define who can perform certain operations on Key Vault, secrets, keys, and certificates. In this case, you want to grant access to App1. You then assign the policy to the Microsoft Azure App Service principal. After creating the access policy, you should assign it to the Azure App Service principal, not user1. This allows App1 to use the certificate stored in KV1. Assigning a managed user entity to App1, which is option A, and configuring KV1 to use RBAC, which is option D, are not directly related to granting access to the certificate for App1. And option C is incorrect because you should assign the policy to the Azure App Service principal, not user1. Friends, I hope now you understand why option B is correct here and option A, C, and D got eliminated. Question number 170. You have an Azure subscription. You plan to deploy the resources shown in the following table. You have 5 resources, basically IP1, NSG1, VNet1, NIC1, VM1, and their types are defined. Obviously, the first 4 resources are Microsoft.network type, and 5th one being a virtual machine is a compute resource, which is Microsoft.compute. You need to create a single Azure Resource Manager template that will be used to deploy the resources. Which resource should be added to the depends on section for VM1? Your options are VNet1, NIC1, IP1, NSG1. The most direct and crucial dependency for VM1 among the listed resources is NIC1. The NIC acts as a bridge between the VM and other network resources like the virtual network, public IP, and network security group. Therefore, it's essential to ensure that NIC1 is deployed before VM1 is created. Folks, this is one of the tutorial on the Microsoft documentation. As they say in this tutorial, you create a storage account, a virtual machine, a virtual network, and some other dependent resources. Some of the resources cannot be deployed until another resource exists. For example, you can create the virtual machine until you cannot create the virtual machine until its storage account and network interface exists, which is what is asked in the question that we had just now. Network interface is NIC card. You define this relationship by making one resource as dependent on the another resource. As you can see in the diagram on your screen, network interface, which is in short NIC, is at the center of this architecture before a VM can be created, as IP address is assigned to the network interface card and NIC card is directly linked to virtual network, where NSGs are created to control the flow of the network. So before you can even attempt to create virtual machine, you should ensure that a NIC card is associated to it. So folks, before we look at the next questions in the series, if you are liking the content, do not forget to hit that like button and subscribe the channel. Also share the video with your fellow associates who are preparing for Azure Administrator exam. This is question number 171 of the series. You have an Azure subscription that contains a resource group named RG1. You plan to create a storage account named storage1. You have a bicep file named file1. You need to modify file1 so that it can be used to automate the deployment of storage1 to RG1. Which property should you modify? Your options are kind, scope, SKU, location. You can automate the deployment of storage1 to RG1 if the scope is defined. So here I am on the documentation to understand the structure and syntax of bicep file so that you know why scope was chosen as the correct answer here. If you scroll down, you can see target scope. By default, the target scope is set to resource group. If you are deploying at the resource group level, you don't need to set the target scope in your bicep file. The allowed values are resource group, which is what we are trying to do here. It is a default value used for resource group deployments. Then you can have subscription in the values, which is used for subscription deployment. Then you can also have management group as the allowed value, which is used for management group deployments. And then the last one option, allowed option, is tenant, used for tenant deployments. Folks, basically, you can use a bicep to deploy at any of the hierarchy level in Azure. If you do not know about the different levels of hierarchy, which is management group, subscription, or resource group, I already have a detailed video around the hierarchies in Azure. Do not forget to check that out to understand the hierarchy in more detail. This is question number 172. You have an Azure subscription that contains a storage account named storage1. The storage1 account contains a container named container1. You need to configure access to container1 and the solution must meet the following requirements. Only allow read access, allow both HTTP and HTTPS protocols, apply access permissions to all the content in the container. What should you use? Your options are an access policy, a shared access signature, Azure Content Delivery Network, and access keys. Folks, for fulfilling the listed requirement, you should use shared access signature. A shared access signature provides a way to delegate access to resources in your storage account, including specific permissions such as read access protocols, which are HTTP and HTTPS, and constraints. By generating a SAS for your container, you can control and limit the access to the container based on your requirements. You have an Azure subscription that contains the virtual networks shown in the following table. Now you have two virtual networks with the name of VNet1 and VNet2. Both are hosted in East US location, and VNet1 is paired with VNet2 and VNet2 is paired with VNet1. Each virtual network has 50 connected virtual machines. You need to implement Azure Bastion. The solution must meet the following requirements. And your requirements are support host scaling, support uploading and downloading files, support the virtual machines on both VNet1 and VNet2, minimize the number of addresses on the Azure Bastion subnet. How should you configure Azure Bastion? And the first part is regarding subnet size. And your options are subnet mask of 24, 26, 28, and 29. And folks, the correct answer here is subnet mask with 26. Let's head to Microsoft documentation to understand the factors that led to choosing 26 subnet mask as the correct answer. So folks, whenever you deploy Azure Bastion using any SKU except the developer SKU, Bastion requires a dedicated subnet named Azure Bastion subnet. You must create this subnet in the same virtual network that you want to deploy Azure Bastion to. This subnet must have the following configuration. Now, take a note of these configuration as these are the ones that are going to help you in answering this question. The subnet name must be Azure Bastion subnet. Subnet size must be 26 mask or larger. And when we say larger, it is in terms of wordings, it goes down, which is 25, 24, etc. For host scaling, a subnet of 26 mask or larger subnet is recommended. Using a smaller subnet space limits the number of scale units. The subnet must be in the same virtual network and resource group as the Bastion host. The subnet cannot contain other resources. So folks, based on these 5 requirements that have been listed here, you can automatically rule out subnet mask 28 and 29. Now you are left with only 2 options, which is subnet mask 24 and subnet mask 26. And if you noticed in the requirements in the question, it said minimize the number of addresses on the Azure Bastion subnet. So for that very reason, we will eliminate 24 subnet mask and choose 26 subnet mask as the correct answer, because 26 subnet mask will have less IPs as compared to 24 subnet mask. Now, the next part of the question is regarding public IP, and your options are basic SKU with dynamic allocation, basic SKU with static allocation, and standard SKU with static allocation. And the correct answer here would be standard SKU with static allocation. Again, let's head to documentation to read more about public IP with Azure Bastion. Now, as you can see in the public IP addresses section, Azure Bastion deployments require a public IP address except developer SKU deployments. The public IP must have the following configuration. The public IP address SKU must be standard. That's the first part of all the options. Then the public IP address assignment allocation method must be static. The public IP address name is the resource name by which you want to refer to this public IP address. You can choose to use a public IP address that you already created as long as it meets the criteria required by Azure Bastion and isn't already in use. So folks, even though we have gone through all the 4 configurations, but the answer just lies in the first 2 configurations. The public IP address SKU must be standard and public IP address allocation method must be static. If we combine these 2 options, then you get the right choice in this case, which was the third option, standard SKU with static allocation. I hope you now understand why I have chosen standard SKU with static allocation as the correct answer. But if you still have any doubts, please post them in the comments section. This is question number 174. You plan to deploy several Azure virtual machines that will run Windows Server 2019 in a virtual machine scale set by using an Azure Resource Manager template. You need to ensure that Nginx is available on all the virtual machines after they are deployed. What should you use? Your options are the publish-AZVM DSC configuration commandlet, Azure Application Insights, Azure Custom Script Extension, the new-AZ configuration assignment commandlet. And folks, the correct answer here is Azure Custom Script Extension. The Custom Script Extension downloads and runs scripts on Azure virtual machines. Use this extension for post-deployment configuration, software installation, or any other configuration or management task. So we are specifically concerned about software installation, and in our case, it's Nginx. You can download scripts from Azure Storage or GitHub to provide them to the Azure portal at extension runtime. The custom script extension integrates with Azure Resource Manager template, which is one of the requirements in this question. You can also run it by using the Azure CLI, Azure PowerShell, the Azure PowerShell portal, or Azure Virtual Machines REST API. You have an Azure subscription that contains a recovery services vault named Vault 1. You need to enable multi-user authorization MAU for Vault 1. Which resource should you create first? Your options are an administrative unit, a managed identity, a resource guard, a custom Azure role. Folks, let's first understand what is multi-user authorization for Recovery Services Vault. So this is one of the official pages from Microsoft, which is talking about multi-user authorization in Azure Backup. Multi-user authorization for Azure Backup allows you to add an additional layer of protection to critical operations on your recovery services vaults and backup vaults. For MUA, Azure Backup uses another Azure resource called the Resource Guard to ensure critical operations are performed only with applicable authorization. So for that very reason, we will choose option C, a resource guard, as the correct choice in this case. So folks, before we proceed forward, I would like to remind you that we have now reached 175 questions in this series. If you are looking to gain PDF access to all these questions, then do not forget to join the channel at Gold membership tier. Once you have joined the channel, just email me at devopshub2023@gmail.com, which is also available on your screen now, and gain access to the PDF. Let's look at question number 176. You have an on-premise data center and an Azure subscription. You plan to connect the data center to Azure by using ExpressRoute. You need to deploy an ExpressRoute gateway. The solution must meet the following requirements. Your options are support up to 10 Gbps of traffic, support availability zones, support fast path, minimize costs. Which SKU should you deploy? Your options are ERGW1AZ, ERGW2, ERGW3, and ERGW3AZ. Folks, this is unfortunately one of those questions where you have to memorize things, as no logic applies to such questions. Let's scroll through Microsoft documentation and see which one is best suited for the given requirement. The ExpressRoute virtual network gateways can use the following SKUs: ERGW scale, which is in preview, standard, high performance, ultra performance, ERGW1AZ, ERGW2AZ, and ERGW3AZ. So folks, based on this, you can say that out of the four options, option B and option C are not even valid options. So we can automatically rule out option B and C. Now we are left with option A, which is ERGW1AZ, and ERGW3AZ, which is option D. Let's scroll through this page more and read about different requirements that are shown here. Now, one of the requirement is it should support fast path. Now, let's read through this table. The following table shows the features supported across each gateway type. If you are using ERGW1AZ, and if you can see fast path is not supported, so you can again, this will help you in eliminating one more option. So you can eliminate option A. And now we are just left with option D, which is ERGW3AZ, and that supports fast path. Even though we have eliminated all the options and we now know what is the correct answer, which is option D, but let's scroll through this page and read about different other requirements that we need to specify. Now, one of the requirement is support up to 10 Gbps of traffic. And here again, you can see ERGW1AZ just supports up to 1 Gbps. Then ERGW2AZ, which is not even in our options, supports up to 2 Gbps. And ERGW3AZ supports up to 10 Gbps. So this is again one more indication that option D is the correct choice in our case. So folks, this is question number 177. You have an Azure subscription that contains a resource group named RG1. You plan to create an Azure Resource Manager template to deploy a new virtual machine named VM1. VM1 must support the capture of performance data. You need to specify resource dependencies for the ARM template. In which order should you deploy the resources? To answer, move all the resources from the list to resources, list of resources to the answer area and arrange them in the correct order. So basically you just need to tell in which order you need to specify resource dependencies. And resources are virtual machine, Azure monitor extension, network interface, and virtual network. So folks, you just not need to create the VM here, but you also need, your VM also needs to support the capture of performance data. That is the reason in the resources you have Azure monitor, mention about Azure monitor extension as well. So take that into consideration. And the correct answers are now on your screen. First two steps should be crystal clear to you. If you watched the previous part, you first need to create the virtual network, followed by network interface, and then you create the virtual machine. Finally, you will install Azure Monitor extension to support capturing the performance data. This order ensures that the necessary network and interface components are created before the virtual machine and the extension is installed after the VM is created to support capturing the performance data. So folks, before we proceed forward, if you are liking the content, then do not forget to hit the like button and subscribe the channel, as this helps the video reach a wider audience. Now let's look at question number 178. You have an Azure subscription. You plan to migrate 50 virtual machines from VMware vSphere to the subscription. You create a recovery services vault. What should you do next? Your options are configure an extended network, create a recovery plan, deploy an open virtualization application OVA template to vSphere, configure a virtual network. Friends, I feel this is a very poorly worded question, as looking at the options, it seems to be related to preparing for disaster recovery to Azure. However, question uses the word migrate to Azure, for which you have a specific tool called Azure Migrate. I'll go with an assumption that this is part of disaster recovery setup, just because the question says they have created a recovery services vault, which we don't need while working with Azure VM Migrate. So here we are in the documentation to prepare Azure for on-premise disaster recovery to Azure. As you can see, the first step here is create a recovery services vault, which is not even needed when you are using Azure Migrate. That is the reason I'm following this documentation, and based on this, I'll be choosing the correct choice. So the first step is to create a recovery services vault, and then you set up an Azure network. Now, as part of setting up the Azure network, you need to create a virtual network, which is one of the options. And that is the reason we will choose create or probably configure a virtual network as the correct choice. So folks, if we go with Azure Migrate as the base to answer this question, then the answer would be option C, deploy an open virtualization application OVA template to vSphere. But that doesn't need recovery services vault. So I have gone with an assumption that they are talking about disaster recovery while using migrate as a word, which is not fit for this question. Let's look at question number 179. You have an Azure subscription that contains the virtual networks shown in the following table. All the virtual networks are peered. Each virtual network contains 9 virtual machines. You need to configure secure RDP connections to the virtual machines by using Azure Bastion. What is the minimum number of Bastion hosts required? And your options are 1, 3, 9, and 10. Now you have 10 virtual networks, and they are using 3 locations. Basically, first 3 virtual networks are in US East, and then the next 3 virtual networks are in UK South, and then the last 4 virtual networks are in Asia East. So we need to tell how many or what is the minimum number of Bastion hosts required. And folks, the correct answer here is you just need 1 Bastion host. Let's go through the Bastion host documentation to understand this more. Azure Bastion and VNet peering can be used together. when VNet peering is configured, you don't have to deploy Azure Bastion in each peered VNet. This is one of the key things that I have taken into consideration while choosing that the minimum number of Bastion host is 1, because the question said irrespective of whether they have whatever number of virtual networks, they are peered with each other. So that is why you just need one Azure Bastion host. This means, now let's read through. This means if you have an Azure Bastion host configured in one virtual network, it can be used to connect VMs deployed in peered VNets without deploying an additional Bastion host. Now, Azure Bastion works with the following type of peering: virtual network peering and global virtual network peering. Which virtual network peering is connect virtual networks within the same Azure region, and global network peering is connecting virtual networks across Azure regions. So even though all the virtual networks are segregated across different regions, but since Azure Bastion supports global virtual network peering, that doesn't really matter in our case, and we can still choose one Bastion host as the correct answer. If the requirements were tweaked a bit, let's say the virtual networks were not peered, or there was some new criteria added in the requirement, then the correct choice will definitely change. So it is, again, as I always say, it is very important you pay attention to these small keywords mentioned in the question. There are many distractors as well, but there are few keywords that help you eliminate the incorrect choices. This is question number 180 of the series. You have an Azure subscription that contains 10 network security groups, 10 virtual machines, and a log analytics workspace named Workspace 1. Each NSG is connected to a virtual machine. You need to configure an Azure Monitor Network Insights alert that will be triggered when suspicious network traffic is detected. What should you do first? Your options are deploy connection monitor, configure data collection endpoints, configure a private link, configure NSG flow logs. And friends, the correct answer here is configure NSG flow logs. Let's understand NSG flow logs in more detail. Network Security Groups flow logging is a feature of Azure Network Watcher that allows you to log information about IP traffic flowing through a network security group. Flow data is sent to Azure storage from where you can access it and export it to any visualization tool, security information and event management solution, which is CM solution, or intrusion detection system IDS of your choice. Why you should use flow logs? It's vital to monitor, manage, and know your own network so that you can protect and optimize it. You need to know the current state of the network, who's connecting, and where users are connecting from. It gives you a lot of information about your network. You also need to know which ports are open to the internet, what network behavior is expected, and what network behavior is irregular, and when sudden rises in traffic happen. So you get a lot of monitoring to understand what is happening at your network level. Now, flow logs are the source of truth for all network activity in your cloud environment. Whether you are in a startup that's trying to optimize resources or a large enterprise that's trying to detect intrusion, flow logs can help. You can use them for optimizing network flows, monitoring throughput, verifying compliance, detecting intrusions, and more. Let's look at some of the common use cases. The first one are from network monitoring perspective. You identify unknown or undesired traffic. You monitor traffic levels and bandwidth consumption. You filter flow logs by IP and port to understand application behavior. And you can export flow logs to analytics and visualization tools of your choice to set up monitoring dashboard. This is what we are doing in this question, where we are using the log analytics workspace named Workspace 1. Now let's look at the common use cases from monitoring and optimization perspective. You identify top talkers in your network. You combine with geo IP data to identify cross-region traffic. You understand traffic growth for capacity forecasting. You use data to remove overly restrictive traffic rules. And then from compliance perspective, use flow data to verify network isolation and compliance with enterprise access rules. And from network forensics and security analysis perspective, you can analyze network flows from compromised IPs and network interfaces. You can export flow logs to any SIEM or IDS tool of your choice. That is what we read when we were reading the introduction of NSG flow logs. Question number 181. You have an Azure subscription that contains the virtual networks shown in the following table. You have 3 virtual networks named VNet1, VNet2, and VNet3. The location of VNet1 and VNet2 is East US and VNet3 is hosted in West US. VNet1 is paired with VNet2, VNet2 is paired with VNet1 and VNet3, VNet3 is paired with VNet2. The subscription contains the virtual machines shown in the following table. You have 3 virtual machines named VM1, VM2, and VM3. VM1 and VM3 are using Windows operating system and VM2 is Linux based. VM1 is connected to VNet1, VM2 is connected to VNet2, and VM3 is connected to VNet3. Each virtual machine contains only a private IP address. You create an Azure bastion for VNet1 as shown in the exhibit on the right hand side of your screen. Basically, the name of the bastion is bastion1, region is East US, tier is basic, instance count is 2, virtual network is VNet1, and it is using a subnet named Azure Bastion subnet with a subnet mask of 24. Public IP address does not exist but is being created, and the name of the public IP address is VNet1-IP. And the SKU for public IP is standard and assignment is static. Now, based on this exhibit, you need to tell whether the statements that are going to be shown now are right or wrong. And the first statement is the remote desktop client mstsc.exe can be used to connect VM1 through Bastion1. MSTSC is Windows native client. So let's read through the requirement of using Bastion with native client. So folks, when you deploy the Bastion, you need to specify the following settings. On the basics tab for instance details tier, select standard. You need to select standard tier. Native client support requires the standard SKU. Before you create the Bastion host, go to advanced tab and check the box for native client support along with checkboxes for any other features that you want to deploy. Then you just review and validate, and then you create your Bastion host. So friends, you saw that standard SKU is needed to use the Windows native client, but here in our exhibit, you can see the basic SKU has been selected. That is why this statement is incorrect. The remote desktop client cannot be used to connect to VM1 through Bastion1. Let's look at next statement. The Azure portal can use SSH to connect to VM2 through Bastion1. Bastion is deployed in VNet1 as you can see in the exhibit, and VNet1 is paired with VNet2 where VM2 is deployed. So VM2 will be accessible using Bastion, and this statement is correct. Let's look at third statement. The Azure portal can use SSH to connect to VM3 through Bastion1. This statement is exactly same as that of statement 2. The only difference is earlier we were talking about VM2 and now we are talking about VM3. VM3 is deployed in VNet3, which has no peering defined with VNet1 where Bastion is deployed. So VM3 won't be accessible using Bastion. Therefore, this statement is incorrect. Let's look at SKU and Bastion details as there are more reasons to confirm correct answers of statement 2 and 3 than just the ones that I just mentioned. So folks, this is the article on Microsoft website which is talking about different SKUs and what you can do when you are using certain SKU of the Bastion. So there are basically 3 SKUs: developer, basic, and standard. Now the features are defined on the left hand side of the table. You can connect to target VMs in same virtual network. So you can see whether you are using any of the SKU, you can do this and achieve this functionality. However, the main feature that you have to take into consideration for the scope of our question is, you would have noticed that VM1 and VM3 were Windows based and VM2 was Linux based. So this hosting OS was also influencing the answer that I have chosen. Let's read through that. Connect to Windows VM using RDP and connect to Windows VM using SSH. You can see if you are using developer SKU, then you can connect to Windows VM using RDP, but you cannot connect to Windows VM using SSH. Similarly, if you want to use SSH, then you even can't do it with basic SKU, which we were using. So VM3 was a basic SKU Windows VM. That's why it was also not accessible. So that is one more option to rule out and conclude that statement 3 was an incorrect choice. Similarly, if you are using a Linux VM and you want to connect to it using SSH, or you want to connect using RDP, so with SSH, you get support in all the three SKUs, whether it is developer, whether it is basic, or it is standard. So this was also one of the factor that played a key role. Even if, for example, even if the peering was there, but for instance, it was a Windows VM, so you wouldn't have been able to connect to it using SSH because the basic SKU didn't support it. But here, the basic SKU supports connecting to Linux VM using SSH. That's why the first factor was to ensure the connectivity is there. The second factor was to ensure that the SKU also supports it. Whereas if you are talking about connecting to a Linux VM using RDP, you can see even basic SKU doesn't support it. So for that, you need to have a standard SKU. So friends, I hope now you understand why all the three statements were chosen correct or incorrect. If you still have any doubts, please post them in the comments section. If you are enjoying the content, friends, please hit the like button and subscribe the channel. Remember, if you would like to get access to the full set of questions in PDF format for quick revisions and offline study, then you can gain access to it by joining the channel as a gold member. And then you just need to email me at devopshub2023@gmail.com requesting your PDF copy. Let's now get back to the questions. This is question number 182. You have an Azure subscription. You plan to use an Azure Resource Manager template to deploy a virtual network named VNet1 that will use Azure Bastion. How should you complete the template? Now on the right hand side of your screen, you have a snippet from a template where you can see two question marks in red. You basically need to tell what would be the name of the subnet and what would be the address prefix of the subnet that you are going to use for Azure Bastion. To answer this question, you need to know what are the configurations that you need to select when you are creating a Azure Bastion subnet. So the first one is in the name you have four options, and the options are Azure Bastion subnet, Azure Firewall subnet, LAN 01, remote access subnet. And friends, the correct answer here is first option, which is Azure Bastion subnet. We'll read through the documentation in a while to understand this in more detail, but first, let's look at the address prefix things as well. And in the address prefix, you have four options, which is 10.10.0/26, which is basically the subnet mask 26, subnet mask 27, subnet mask 29, and subnet mask 30. And the correct answer, friends, here is with the subnet mask 26. Now let's head to Microsoft documentation to understand this in more detail, so that if there is any variation of this question in exam, then you also know what you need to choose in that case. So friends, when you deploy Azure Bastion using any SKU except the developer SKU, Bastion requires a dedicated subnet named Azure Bastion subnet. This is what answers the first part of the question. You must create this subnet in the same virtual network that you want to deploy Azure Bastion to. The subnet must have the following configuration. Subnet name must be Azure Bastion subnet, which is what we know. Subnet size must be mask 26 or larger, which is 25, 24, and so on, which is what answers the second part of your question. The subnet masks which were given in the question were 26, 27, 29, and 30, and the largest was 26. And folks, before I go ahead with the other parts of these requirements or configurations, let's read through this important section. For Azure Bastion resource deployed on or after November 2021, the minimum Azure Bastion subnet size is subnet mask 26 or larger. All Azure Bastion resources deployed in subnet of size 27 subnet mask prior to this date are unaffected by this change and will continue to work. But we highly recommend increasing the size of an existing Azure Bastion subnet to subnet mask 26 in case you choose to take advantage of host scaling in the future. So if you don't really need to use host scaling, you can still use a subnet mask of 27, but it is highly recommended you use 26 or a larger subnet. The subnet must be in the same virtual network and resource group as the Bastion host. The subnet cannot contain other resources. So these are two other configurations that I wanted to you to be across, as these can also play a critical role in answering these type of questions. Question number 183. You have an Azure subscription that contains a resource group named RG1 and a virtual network named VNet1. You plan to create an Azure container instance named container1. You need to be able to configure DNS name label scope reuse for container1. What should you configure for container1? And your options are the private networking type, the public networking type, a new subnet on VNet1, a confidential SKU. You can set the DNS name reuse policy on the networking tab during the container instance creation process using the DNS name label scope reuse field, and it's only available after choosing public networking type, which is option B. Public networking type allows you to assign a DNS name label to the container instance that is globally unique within Azure, and it's accessible from the internet. This is typically used when you want to expose a service hosted in a container to the public. So folks, I am now in the create container instance wizard in the Azure portal just to show you where those settings show. I am currently in the networking tab, and in the networking type, there are basically three options available: public, private, and none. If you can see, when the public option is selected, you get the option as DNS name label scope reuse. And the option that is selected is any reuse unsecure. Let's type the name so that this becomes available. For example, let's type something, and if in this now you can see DNS name label scope reuse is not grayed out now, and you can choose from the available options. The options are tenant, subscription, resource group, no reuse, any reuse. Any reuse was selected by default, and it is an unsecure option. And let's read through the definition of it. A deterministic hash of your selected customer specific data will be auto-generated and added as a DNS name label to your container instance FQDN, which is fully qualified domain name. This hash prevents malicious subdomains takeover and ensures that the FQDN can only be reused within the selected scope. Now, if I change the networking type, you can see this option goes away. It is not available if you choose networking type as private, and it is also not available when you choose networking type as none. So friends, I hope you now understand why public networking type has been chosen as the correct answer in this case. Question number 184. You have an Azure subscription that contains a virtual network named VNet1. VNet1 uses two express route circuits that connect to two separate on-premise data centers. You need to create a dashboard to display detailed metrics and a visual representation of the network topology. What should you use? And your options are Azure Monitor Network Insights, a data collection rule also called as DCR, an Azure Virtual Network Watcher, Log Analytics. And friends, the most appropriate choice for this case would be option A, Azure Monitor Network Insights. Azure Monitor Network Insights provide a comprehensive and visual representation through topology, health, and metrics of all deployed network resources without requiring any configuration. It also provides access to network monitoring capabilities like connection monitor, NSG flow logs, and traffic analytics. Additionally, it provides other network diagnostic features as well. Folks, let's now find out if express route is a supported resource, as that's the critical resource in the network topology in question. So as you can see now, I am in the availability of resources sections. By default, all networking resources are visible in Azure Monitor Network Insights. You can select the resource type for viewing resource health and metrics. Subscription details, location, a subset of networking resources has been onboarded. For onboarded resources, you have access to a resource specific topology view and a built-in metrics workbook. These out-of-box experiences make it easier to explore resource metrics and troubleshoot issues. Resources that have been pre-onboarded are Application Gateway, Azure Bastion, Azure Firewall, Azure Front Door. There are many Azure NAT Gateway, Express Route, which is what is the center of answering our question, Load Balancer, Local Network Gateway, and so on. You can read through this list. So basically what you know now is, even if the question was talking about something else other than the express routes, then still the answer remains same if it is from one of the resources mentioned in this list. This is question number 185 of the series, friends. You have a Microsoft Entra tenant that has the contoso.onmicrosoft.com domain name. You have a domain name of contoso.com registered at a third-party registrar. You need to ensure that you can create Entra ID users that have names containing a suffix of @contoso.com. Which three actions should you perform in sequence? To answer, move the appropriate actions from the list of actions to the answer area and arrange them in correct order. So folks, you need to choose three actions and you need to put them in the correct order. Now the actions given are: add a record to the public contoso.com DNS zone, add an Azure AD tenant, configure company branding, create an Azure DNS zone, add a custom name, verify the domain. And the first step here is to add a custom domain name to Azure AD. When we add a custom domain name, Azure AD gives us the information we need to create DNS records at the domain name registrar. And the next step would be to add a record to the public contoso.com DNS zone. You need to add a DNS record to your domain name registrar to verify that you own the domain. This record is typically a TXT or MX record for domain verification. Finally, you verify the domain in Azure portal. Entra ID checks if the DNS record exists, and if it does, the domain is verified. Question number 186. You have a registered DNS domain name contoso.com. You create a public Azure DNS zone named contoso.com. You need to ensure that records created in the contoso.com zone are resolvable from the internet. What should you do? Your options are: create NS records in contoso.com, modify the SOA record in the DNS domain registrar, create the SOA record in contoso.com, modify the NS records in the DNS domain registrar. To ensure that records created in the contoso.com zone are resolvable from the internet, you need to modify the NS, which is name server record, in the DNS domain registrar. When you create a public Azure DNS zone named contoso.com, Azure assigns a set of NS records for that zone. These NS records specify the name servers responsible for handling DNS queries for contoso.com domain. To make the records in the Azure DNS zone resolvable from the internet, you need to update the NS records at the DNS domain registrar to point to the name servers provided by Azure. Let's look at question number 187, folks. You have an Azure subscription that contains a storage account named storage1. The subscription is linked to an Entra ID tenant named contoso.com that syncs to an on-premise Active Directory domain. The domain contains the security principles shown in the following table. Now you have a user with the name of user1 and you have a computer with the name of computer1. In Entra ID, you create a user named user2. The storage1 account contains a file share named share1 and has the following configurations. Its kind is storage v2, and in the properties you can see Azure file identity based authentication has been chosen, and in the directory service option AD is chosen. When they mention AD, it is on-premise Active Directory. And the properties mentioned of the Active Directory are domain name, NetBIOS domain name, and forest name. All are contoso.com. Folks, let's first look at Azure Files identity-based authentication so we have a better idea while answering the upcoming questions. So Azure File supports identity-based authentication over SMB through the following methods. You can only use one method per storage account. The first one is on-premises ADDS authentication, which is what is being used in our question. On-premise ADDS joined or Microsoft Entra Domain Services joined Windows machines can access Azure file shares with on-premise Active Directory credentials that are synced to Microsoft Entra ID over SMB. Your client must have unimpeded network connectivity to your ADDS. If you already have ADDS set up on premises or on a VM in Azure where your devices are domain joined to your AD, you should use ADDS for Azure file shares authentication. Now the next one is Microsoft Entra Domain Services authentication. Cloud-based Microsoft Entra Domain Services joined Windows VMs can access Azure file shares with Microsoft Entra credentials. In this solution, Microsoft Entra ID runs a traditional Windows Server AD domain on behalf of the customer, which is a child of the customer's Microsoft Entra tenant. And the third one is Microsoft Entra Kerberos for hybrid identities. Using Microsoft Entra ID for authenticating hybrid user identities allows Microsoft Entra users to access Azure file shares using Kerberos authentication. This means your end users can access Azure file shares over the internet without requiring network connectivity to domain controllers from Microsoft Entra Hybrid Joined and Microsoft Entra Joined VMs. Cloud-only identities are not currently supported. So folks, you should know the difference between cloud-only identities and hybrid identities as well. Cloud-only identities are the identities or the users that are created in the cloud, which is Azure AD, or you can say the new name is Entra ID. And hybrid identities are basically the identities that have been created in the on-premise Active Directory and were synced to Azure AD. And the fourth authentication is AD Kerberos authentication for Linux clients. Linux clients can use Kerberos authentication over SMB for Azure files using on-premise ADDS or Microsoft Entra Domain Services. Now let's read through the restrictions section, as this is critical for answering the questions that you will just see. None of the authentication methods support assigning share level permissions to computer accounts using Azure RBAC. Because computer accounts cannot be synced to an identity in Microsoft Entra ID, if you want to allow a computer account to access Azure file shares using identity-based authentication, use a default share level permission or consider using a service logon account instead. Identity-based authentication is not supported with network file system shares, which is NFS shares. So for each of the following statements, select yes if the statement is true, otherwise select no. And the first statement is you can assign the storage file data SMB share contributor role to user 1 for share 1. Now, since user 1 is a hybrid identity synced from on-premise ADDS for which RBAC roles can be assigned. This statement is correct. Now let's look at next statement. You can assign the storage file data SMB share reader role to computer 1 for share 1. You would already know computer accounts do not have an identity in Microsoft Entra ID, so you cannot configure Azure role RBAC roles for them. This statement is incorrect. The third statement is you can assign the storage file data SMB share elevated contributor role to user 2 for share 1. User 2 is a cloud-only identity, so you cannot use it for permission assignment, making this statement as incorrect. Next question. You have a Microsoft Entra tenant named contoso.com. You have a CSV file that contains the names and email address of 500 external users. You need to create a guest user account in contoso.com for each of the 500 external users. The solution you present is from Entra ID in the Azure portal. You use the bulk invite users operation. Does that meet the goal? You need to tell whether this is correct or not. And folks, this will not meet the goal. Let's head to MS documentation to understand the requirements for bulk invite users operation, which led to marking this as the incorrect solution. So if you use Microsoft Entra B2B collaboration to work with external partners, you can invite multiple guest users to your organization at the same time. In this tutorial, you learn how to use the Microsoft Entra Admin Center to send bulk invitations to external users. Specifically, you will follow these steps. Use bulk invite users to prepare a comma-separated value file with the user information and invitation preferences. Upload the CSV file to Microsoft Entra ID. Verify the users were added to the directory. Now let's head to one of the critical statements. As you can see, you sign in into the Microsoft Entra Admin Center as at least a user administrator. Browse to identity and then click on all users, perform a bulk operations and do a bulk invite. Now on the bulk invite users page, select download to get a valid CSV template with the invitation properties. This is the critical thing which has led to ensuring that the statement or the solution that was provided was not correct. Now open the CSV template and add a line for each guest user. Required values are email address to invite the user who will receive an invitation, and the second critical or important value, required value, is redirection URL. The URL to which the invited user is forwarded after accepting the invitation. If you want to forward the user to the My Apps page, you must change this value to the given value. Then you save the file and do the bulk invite. So folks, in our question, basically the CSV file that was created had name and email address. Even though email address is the mandatory field which was there, but the second mandatory field, which is redirection URL, was not there in the CSV file. So the solution will not meet the goal. You won't be able to invite them using the CSV file in its current format. Question number 189. You have an Azure subscription named subscription 1 that contains a virtual network VNet 1. You add the users in the following table. You have 3 users with the name of user 1, user 2, and user 3. User 1 has owner role, user 2 has security admin role, user 3 has network contributor role. Which user can perform each configuration? To answer, select the appropriate options below. And the first operation or the configuration is add a subnet to VNet 1. And then in the options, you have a combination of different users. So friends, user 1 has owner role, which lets you manage everything, including access to resources. Therefore, user 1 should be able to add a subnet to VNet 1. User 2 has security admin role, which lets it to view security policies, view security states, edit security policies, view alerts and recommendations, dismiss alerts and recommendations. Therefore, user 2 won't be able to add a subnet to VNet 1. And user 3 has network contributor role, which lets it manage networks, including creating subnets. So the correct answer here is option 3. User 1 and user 3 will be able to add a subnet to VNet 1. Let's look at next configuration. Assign a user the reader role to VNet 1. Again, in the options, you have a combination of different users, and based on the explanation of roles, you would already know by now that only user 1 can assign a user the reader role to VNet 1, making it the correct choice. Friends, I hope you have now understood why the options have been chosen as the correct one in this case, but if you still have any doubts, please post them in the comments section. Let's look at question number 190 of the series. You have an Azure subscription that contains the following users in a Microsoft Entra tenant named contoso.onmicrosoft.com. Basically, you have 4 users with the name of user 1, user 2, user 3, and user 4. User 1 and user 2 have global administrator role at Entra ID scope. User 3 has user administrator role at Entra ID scope. And user 4 has owner role at subscription scope. Now, user 1 creates a new Entra tenant named external.contoso.onmicrosoft.com. You need to create new user accounts in external.contoso.onmicrosoft.com. The solution is you instruct user 2 to create the user accounts. Does that meet the goal? You need to choose between yes or no. And friends, this does not meet the goal. User 2 won't be able to create users in external.contoso.onmicrosoft.com. You would notice that user 2 is global administrator for tenant contoso.onmicrosoft.com, and the new tenant was created by user 1, who will be the owner of new tenant. User 2 will not get any role unless exclusively given by user 1. Therefore, this solution will not meet the required goal. So folks, there can be multiple variations of this question. For example, if this question was talking about you instruct user 1 to create the user account, then it would have been yes, because user 1 is going to be the owner of the new tenant, as it is the one who created it. Or there would have been a different variation of this question. You add user 2 as a user administrator for the new tenant and instruct it to add user account. In that case also the solution would have been met. This is question number 191 of the series, friends. You have 2 Azure subscriptions named Sub1 and Sub2. An administrator creates a custom role that has an assignable scope to a resource group named RG1 in Sub1. You need to ensure that you can apply the custom role to any resource group in Sub1 and Sub2. The solution must minimize administrative effort. What should you do? Your options are: select the custom role and add Sub1 and Sub2 to the assignable scopes. Remove RG1 from the assignable scopes. Create a new custom role for Sub1. Create a new custom role for Sub2. Remove the role from RG1. Create a new custom role for Sub1 and add Sub2 to the assignable scope. Remove the role from RG1. Select the custom role and add Sub1 to the assignable scopes. Remove RG1 from assignable scopes. Create a new custom role for Sub2. Friends, key to answer this question is minimize the administrative effort, as all solutions will achieve the end goal, and the solution which achieves the end goal with minimum administrative effort is option A. Select the custom role and add Sub1 and Sub2 to the assignable scopes. Remove RG1 from the assignable scopes. So friends, when you create a custom role, there are certain properties that you need to take into consideration. The first one is name, which is the role name. Second one is the ID name. Third one is basically the role type, whether it is a custom role, which you have to set to true, or custom role for custom roles. You have to give it a description. You have to define the actions. All these fields which I just mentioned are mandatory fields. And then you have some not actions, which is not a mandatory field. Then you can have data actions. Then you can have not data actions, which are 3 non-mandatory fields. And the final one is assignable scope, which is what we are concerned about while answering this question. And it is an array of strings that specifies the scope that the custom role is available for assignment. Maximum number of assignable scopes is 2000. So friends, this is the array of strings. Basically, you can have multiple values here. So in this case, in our question, earlier the scope was defined as a resource group, but now for the scope, you will remove the resource group and instead define sub1 and sub2 in the assignable scope. If we scroll a bit up, we can see an example which will be which will make things more clearer to you. In this example, the name of the custom role is virtual machine operator. Custom is set to true because it is a custom role. Description is set to can monitor and restart virtual machines. Then there are certain actions assigned here. Basically, the user who will get this role will be able to perform these certain actions. And now the not action, data action, and not data actions are left blank. These are not mandatory. You don't really need to use them unless you want to make more restrictive permissions. For example, you allowed something in action and you want to deny something in data action and so on. So you could use these roles. And the main part comes is assignable scope. So you can see it is assigned on 2 different subscriptions, which is subscription ID 1 and subscription ID 2. And then there is a provider defined, which is defined at a management group level and is targeted to group ID 1 only in the management group. So this pretty much confirms that you can have multiple subscriptions here. That is why the chosen option was to change the assignable scope and remove RG1 from there and add sub1 and sub2. This would have achieved the goal in the minimum administrative effort, which was always the key to answer this question. This is question number 192 of the series. You have an Azure subscription that contains a storage account named storage account 1234 and 2 users named user 1 and user 2. You assign user 1 the roles shown in the following exhibit. Basically, you can see there are 2 roles that are assigned to user 1, where you have one role named as reader role, which is inherited from the resource group level. And then the user 1 has storage blob data contributor role directly assigned on this resource. So let's look at the question. Which 2 actions can user 1 perform? Each correct answer presents a complete solution. And your options are assign roles to user 2 for storage account 1234, upload blob data to storage account 1234, modify the firewall of storage account 1234, view blob data in storage account 1234, view file shares in storage account 1234. Friends, first option is obviously incorrect. As to assign roles, user 1 needs either an owner role or user access administrator role. So you can rule that out. Now, since the user has blob data contributor role, they will be able to upload blob data to storage account, making the option B as a correct choice. And to modify firewall of storage account, user needs storage blob data owner role as it provides full access on containers. So an incorrect choice. And the fourth option is correct because blob data contributor role gives access to view blob data. Friends, one thing to note, the global reader role doesn't give you access to view blob data. It just gives you access to view all resources. So you need to be aware about the differences between the global roles and specific roles. Reader role is just giving it access to view all the resources in this case. And we already know that option E is incorrect as we already have chosen 2 required correct choices. However, for clarification, you need storage file data SMB share contributor role to view file shares in a storage account. So let's read through the permissions of storage, blob, data, contributor, role. It says read, write, and delete Azure storage containers and blobs. Now in the actions, you can see it has 4 permissions defined. It can delete a container, it can rerun a container, or it can return a container or a list of containers, modify a container's metadata or properties, return a user's delegation key for the blob service. Now it also has some data actions defined, which means it can perform certain actions on data as well, which is delete a blob, return a blob or a list of blobs, write to a blob, moves the blob from one path to another, returns the result of adding blob content. It doesn't have any not data actions or not actions defined. So I hope, friends, you now understand why the certain options were chosen as the correct answer in this case. So friends, before we start looking at question number 193, if you have not watched previous 2 parts of the series yet, then do not forget to watch them, as you wouldn't have got the notifications of those parts if you are not member of this channel. So if you are looking to watch those parts as well, do not forget to take out the silver membership of the channel, as that will give you access to both the videos. Now let's look at question number 193. You have an Azure subscription that is linked to a Microsoft Entra tenant. The tenant contains the custom role-based access control roles shown in the following table. Both of the roles are custom roles. Make a note of that. And the 2 roles are role 1 and role 2. Role 1 is a Azure subscription role and role 2 is the Entra ID role. From the Azure portal, you need to create 2 custom roles named role 3 and role 4. Role 3 will be an Azure subscription role. Role 4 will be a Entra ID role. Which roles can you clone to create the new roles? So folks, it is very important that you should know the differences here between the Azure subscription role and Entra ID role. So let's head to Azure portal to understand which roles can be cloned, and then we will come back with a better idea to answer this question. So folks, let's first look at a subscription role. And to create a subscription role, what you need to do is you go inside your subscription, select your subscription, and then go in access control IAM, and then you click add, and it will give you options: add role assignment, add co-administrator, and add custom roles. So I have already created a custom role so that we know which all options can be chosen while creating a custom role. Because the requirement given in the question is you are trying to create 2 custom roles, but you already have 2 custom roles, and in the options you need to choose whether you can copy a custom role, you can copy an inbuilt role, or you cannot copy those sort of things. So to see whether a role is a custom role or not, you go into the roles, and then in the types you need to select custom role. So you can see I have created a custom role with the name of test role for this demonstration. Now let's try to create a custom role. And friends, now when you are creating the custom role, you get 3 options in the baseline permissions. Either you can clone an existing role, or you can start from scratch, or you can start from JSON. Now our question is pretty much limited to cloning a role. So let's see what all options you can see here. Now, when you select clone a role, you get a new tab basically where you can select the role to clone. Now, if you open this, you can see you are getting different options: owner, contributor, reader. These are the built-in roles that you can clone. That's the first part to answer the question. Now, let's see if we are able to search the custom role as well here. So if I type test role, you can see test role is also showing up here. That means when you are trying to create a subscription role, you can copy a built-in role as well, and you can also copy a custom role. Let's now head to the Microsoft Entra ID to see more about Entra ID roles. Now for Entra ID, once you are in Entra ID, you need to click on roles and administrators. Once this loads, you get an option to create a new custom role. And friends, here you in the baseline permissions, you only get 2 options, whether start from scratch or clone from a custom role. Now you would notice that here Microsoft is pretty much specific: clone from a custom role. There the words were cloned from a role, and here the words are cloned from a custom role, which confirms that you cannot clone a built-in role. That's what I wanted to show you in the portal. So now I hope you now know, when you are creating a subscription-based role, you can clone a custom role, you can clone a built-in role as well. But when you are creating an intra ID role, you can only clone a custom role or start from scratch. Now let's head back to our presentation and see the questions and try to answer them. So the first part of the question is talking about role 3, and in the question you can see role 3 will be a Azure subscription role. So which roles can you copy? You can copy a custom role and you can copy a built-in role, which means third option, basically role 1 and Azure built-in subscription role only would be the right choice here, because role 1 is a Azure subscription role, so you can copy it. You cannot copy an Azure subscription role and create an intra ID role, or vice versa. You have to have a match. There cannot be a mix and match of these two roles. And the next part of the question is about role 4. And you already know role 4 will be a intra ID role. So basically you can only copy a custom intra ID role and not built-in intra ID role. So what would be the answer? It would be role 2 only. So friends, I hope this has given you clarity on why the options are chosen. But if you still have any doubts, please post them in the comments section. Let's look at question number 194. You have a Microsoft Entra tenant named contoso.com. You have a CSV file that contains the names and email addresses of 500 external users. You need to create a guest user account in contoso.com for each of the 500 external users. And the solution you choose is you create a PowerShell script that runs the new -mg user commandlet for each external user. Does this solution meet the goal? And friends, this solution does not meet the goal. So to create a guest user account in Azure AD or Entra ID, you will use the command new-azure AD ms invitation command. This commandlet is used to invite a new external user to your directory. And here now, if you scroll down, we can see the parameters. The first parameter is invited user display name, basically the display name of the user as it will appear in your directory. Then invited user email address, the email address to which the invitation is sent. Now you can see the display name is not a mandatory field, whereas email address is a mandatory field. And then the third option or parameter is invited user message info, additional information to specify how the invitation message is sent. Again, this is not a mandatory parameter. Then the next parameter is invited user type, the user type of the user being invited. By default, this is guest. You can invite as member if you are a company administrator. And again, this is not a mandatory field, so you can skip it. Then the last parameter is invited redirect URL, the URL to which the invited user is forwarded after accepting the invitation. And this is a mandatory field. And there is one more field as well, send invitation message, which is a Boolean parameter that indicates whether or not an invitation message will be sent to the invited user. And this is also a non-mandatory field. Question number 195 of the series. You have an Entra ID tenant named contoso.com. You have two external partner organizations named fabricam.com and litwareincorporation.com. Fabricam.com is configured as a connected organization. Friends, make a note, fabricam.com is configured as a connected organization. This will be helpful in answering the question. You create an access package as shown in the access package exhibit on the right-hand side of your screen. The name of the package is package 1, description is guest user, catalog name is general, and then it is applied to a group named group 1. Which is a security group, and role is member. Now, basically it tells you whether who can request access, all configured connected organizations. So this is why I was telling you, make a note that fabricam.com is configured as a connected organization, whereas litwareincorporation.com doesn't have any mention. So we can assume that it is not connected. Require approval is set to no and enabled is set to yes. Basically, this package is enabled. And at the bottom, you can see there is a lifecycle defined. Access package assignments expire after 365 days and require access reviews is set to no. Let's now look at further things in this question. You configure the external user lifecycle settings as shown in the lifecycle exhibit. And in the lifecycle exhibit, basically it says block external users from sign in to this directory is set to yes, and remove external user is also set to yes. And the condition is number of days before removing external user from this directory is 30 days. So friends, for each of the following statements, select yes if the statement is true, otherwise select no. And the first statement is litwareincorporation.com users can be assigned to package. And friends, this statement is incorrect because litwareincorporation.com is not defined as a connected organization, so this access package doesn't apply to it. Statement 2, after 365 days, fabricam.com users will be removed from group 1. And this statement is correct because it was specified in the access package that after 365 days, the users will be removed. We'll understand this in more detail in a while. First, let's look at statement 3. After 395 days, fabricam.com users will be removed from the contoso.com tenant. Again, this is correct because after 365 days, they are going to get removed from the groups. And on the life cycle of external users on your screen, it says number of days before removing external users from this directory is 30 days. So basically 365 plus 30 is 395. That means after 365 days, it will be removed from the group. And after 395 days, it will be removed from tenant. So friends, let's read through add a group or team resource role to understand why statement 2 that after 365 days the user will be removed from group was chosen is the correct choice. You can have entitlement management automatically add users to a group or team in Microsoft Teams when they are assigned an access package. And now the points are when a membership of a group or team is a resource role that's part of an access package and a user is assigned to that access package, the user is added as a member to that team or group if not already present. Now the next statement is what is going to confirm the answer. When a user's access package assignment expires, you would have seen in the snapshot that the assignment was going to expire after 365 days. They are removed from the group or team unless they currently have an assignment to another access package that includes the same group or team. So folks, in the question, there was no mention of whether the users have assignment to a different package or same group and so on. That is why I have chosen that after 365 days, the user will be removed from the group. And after 395 days, they will be removed from the tenant. So friends, I hope you now have clarity on why those options were chosen as the correct choice. But as I always say, if you still have any doubts, then please post them in the comment section. This is question number 196 of the series. You have an Azure subscription. You create the following Azure Resource Manager template named template1. You need to deploy template.json. Which PowerShell commandlet should you run from the Azure Cloud Shell? Your options are new AZ deployment, new AZ management group deployment, new AZ resource group deployment, and new AZ tenant deployment. Friends, if you look closely in this template, they are trying to create a resource group. So the correct answer here would be option A, new AZ deployment. If the template is changed a bit and there is a mention of creating a resource inside the resource group, then correct answer would be option C, new AZ resource group deployment. So friends, let's go through all the commands which were mentioned in the question. The first one was new AZ deployment. As you can see, it creates a deployment at the current subscription scope. This command has another alias as well, which is new AZ subscription deployment. However, that has been deprecated and the new command is new-AZ deployment. It is to create a deployment at the current subscription scope. And if we scroll down, let's look at one of the examples. Basically, when you are using this command, you need to run new dash AZ deployment. Then this is the location. Basically, here the location is West US, and this location is not the location where resources are going to create it. This is the location where the metadata of your deployment is going to be saved. And then it has a parameter dash template file where you specify which template file you are trying to deploy. And then it has a parameter template parameter file. Again, it is the location to the file which has your parameters saved. Then if you want to create any tags during the deployment, then you can create, you can use the parameter dash tag, and it is a hash table, which is you can have multiple key value pairs inside this tag. So friends, the next command was new dash AZ management group deployment. This command is used to create a deployment at the management group level. If I scroll down and see through an example, basically the example is new dash AZ management group deployment. Then you need to specify the management group ID. Then everything is similar to new AZ deployment. You specify the location where your deployment metadata is going to be saved. Then you specify the template file, template parameter file, and you can also specify the tags as part of the hash table. So friends, the third command was new dash AZ resource group deployment. As you can see, it adds a deployment at a resource group level. So the first command was doing the deployment at the subscription level. The second command was doing the deployment at the management group level. And this third command is doing the deployment at resource group level. And if you look at the example of this command, again, you need to supply the resource group name in this case. In the previous case, because you were doing the deployment at management group level, so you were supplying the management group ID. And in this case, you are going to supply the resource group name. Rest of the parameters are same, where you need to supply the template file, you need to supply the template parameter files, and then any tags that you would like to supply. And fourth and the final command, which was in the question, is new dash AZ tenant deployment. Basically, it creates a deployment at tenant scope. You would already know by now. And if you look at the example here, new dash AZ tenant deployment, then location is West US, and template file you have to specify template parameters file, and then you specify tag. This command is exactly same as that of new AZ deployment. However, the behavior of new AZ deployment is to create a deployment at subscription scope, whereas new dash AZ tenant deployment command, which is exactly same, is going to create a deployment at tenant scope. So friends, I hope you now understand the differences between all four commands in the question, as if you make slight changes to the ARM template, the correct option is going to change. This is question number 197 of the series. You have an Azure subscription that contains the resource groups shown below. You have two resource groups, basically with the name of RG1 and RG2. Both of them have a lock applied. RG1 has a read-only lock applied, and RG2 has a delete lock applied. Now, RG1 contains the resources shown in the following table. Basically, there are three resources with the name of storage 1, VNet 1, IP1. Storage 1 is a storage account which has a lock named lock1 and its type is delete. VNet 1 is a virtual network type which has a lock named lock2 and it is read-only type, and IP1 is a public IP address type and it does not have any lock associated with it. Now the question is, you need to identify which resources you can move from RG1 to RG2. Which resources should you identify? Your options are none, IP1 only, IP1 and storage 1 only, IP1, VNet 1 and storage 1. Folks, you can see there is a lock applied at the resource group level for RG1 and you are trying to move resources from RG1 to RG2, and RG1 has a read-only lock applied. So a read-only lock on a resource group prevents you from moving existing resources in or out of resource group. Therefore, you won't be able to move anything from RG1 to RG2. If the lock on RG1 was maybe delete lock, so you would have been able to move things out of it. But since it has a read-only lock applied to it, therefore you won't be able to move anything from RG1 to RG2. Friends, let's understand locks a bit. As an administrator, you can lock an Azure subscription, resource group, or resource to protect them from accidental user deletions and modification. The lock overrides any user permissions. So this first statement tells you that you can apply lock at subscription level, resource group level, or even at the resource level. This can form one of the questions, so it is important that you should remember this. You can set locks that prevent either deletion or modifications. In the portal, these locks are called as delete and read only. In the command line, these locks are called as cannot delete and read only. Cannot delete means authorized users can read and modify a resource, but they cannot delete it. Read only means authorized users can read a resource, but they cannot delete or update it. Applying this lock is similar to restricting all authorized users to the permission that the reader role provides. Now let's look at lock inheritance. When you apply a lock at a parent scope, all resources within that scope inherit the same lock. Even resources you add later inherit the same parent lock. The most restrictive lock in the inheritance takes precedence. There can be a situation where a resource has both read-only lock and delete lock applied to them. So in that case, read-only lock will take precedence because it is more restrictive in nature. As you would have already read, with read lock, you cannot delete it or you cannot even update it. But with delete lock, you can modify the resource. Therefore, read-only lock is more restrictive in nature. Now, if you scroll down, there are some considerations before applying your locks. Let's read through one of the considerations which has helped us in answering the question. A read-only lock on a resource group prevents you from moving existing resources in or out of the resource group. This is what played a critical role in me choosing none as the right choice in this case. Friends, you should be across all these limitations because there can be different variations of these questions. Folks, before we start looking at question number 198, I would like to remind you that if you are looking to get PDF version of these videos, then they are also available to the channel members at Gold tier. If you think you are spending a lot of time watching these videos and you want to do a quick revision, you just need to join this channel as a Gold member and email me at devopshub2023@gmail.com to request the PDF file. You have an Azure subscription named Subscription 1. Subscription 1 contains a virtual machine named VM1. You install and configure a web server and a DNS server on VM1. VM1 has the effective network security rules shown below. Now there is an exhibit on your screen which shows some of the network security rules that have been configured on VM1. So friends, to answer this question, you should know two things. First one is that rules are processed in the order of their priority. That means rule with priority 100 will be evaluated before the rule with priority 400. And second one is, since the question is talking about web server and DNS server, so you should know that default port of web server connectivity are port 80 and 443, and for DNS server it is port 53. Let's now look at next part of this question. Use the drop-down menus to select the answer choice that completes each statement based on the information presented in the graphic. Internet users, and your options are, can connect to only the DNS server on VM1, can connect to only the web server on VM1, can connect to the web server and the DNS server on VM1, cannot connect to the web server and the DNS server on Web1. To answer this question, let's go back to the exhibit and see the rules that are defined in more detail. So as I said earlier, rules will be evaluated based on their priority. That means rule 2 will be evaluated first. And if you look at rule 2, the port numbers that are mentioned are 50 to 60. And that means DNS server, which runs on port 53 will be denied because the action is defined as denied. That means users won't be able to access the DNS server. That's the first part of the question. Let's now look at whether the web server will be accessible or not. And you would already know web server is at port 80 and 443, which lies between the rule 1 range because it defines rule port 50 to 500 and the action is set to allow. That means the connectivity for the web server will be allowed. Now there is a deny all inbound rule, but its priority you can see is 65,500, but it will not be evaluated because rule 400 will allow the connection, so it will not come into picture. That means the correct answer here would be can connect to only the web server on VM1. Now let's look at next part of this question. If you delete rule 2 internet users, again, all the 4 options. Now the rule 2 was at top of hierarchy, which was blocking DNS server. If you delete rule 2, that means you will be able to access DNS server as well. And the correct answer here would be can connect to web server and the DNS server on VM1. Friends, you can expect similar type of questions in the exam. So it is very important that you know how to read the exhibit of the network security rules, which you saw on your screen. Let's look at question number 199. You have an Azure virtual machine that runs Windows Server 2022 and are configured as shown in the following table. Basically, you have 2 virtual machines with the name of VM1 and VM2. The private IP address of VM1 is 10.1.0.4 and of VM2 is 10.1.0.5. The public IP address of VM1 is 52.186.85.63 and the public address of VM2 is 13.92.168.13. And both of the VMs are connected to VNet1 and the DNS suffix of VM1 is devopshub.com and VM2 is techwithjaspal.com. You create a private Azure DNS zone named devopshub.com. You configure the techwithjaspal.com zone to allow auto registration from VNet1, which A records will be added to the devopshub.com zone for each virtual machines. A records for VM1 and your options are none, private IP address only, public IP address only, private IP address and public IP address. Now, devopshub.com is a private DNS zone which has been linked to VNet1 with auto registration. Therefore, every VM which resides in VNet1 will have a record in devopshub.com, which means a record for VM1 will be private IP address only. Now, the next part is a record for VM2. And due to the very same reason, the correct answer here would also be private IP address only. So friends, the reason to choose private DNS was because of the split horizon functionality of private DNS. This diagram mimics what we were trying to achieve in the question given. You have a virtual network A that has 2 VNets. That's what was happening. VNet A-VM1 and VNet A-VM2. Both have a private IP and public IP configured. This is what you saw in the requirement. A public DNS zone called contoso.com was created and registers the public IP for these VMs as DNS records within the zone. A private DNS zone is also created called contoso.com. You defined virtual network A as a registration virtual network. Azure then automatically registers the VM as A records into the private zone pointing to their private IPs. This is why we have chosen private IP as the correct answer. Now, when an internet client does a DNS query for VNet a-vm1.contoso.com, Azure will return the public IP record from the public zone. If the same DNS query is issued from another VM, for example, VNet A-VM2 in the same virtual network A, Azure will return the private IP record from the private zone. This is the diagram which is trying to demonstrate what was asked in this question. So let's look at question number 200 of the series now. You have an Azure subscription that contains the virtual network shown in the following table. You have two virtual networks with the name of VNet1 and VNet2. Both of them have a subnet named subnet1 and subnet2. Again, the associated network security groups are NSG1 and NSG2. And you can see in the peering, VNet1 is paired with VNet2 and VNet2 is reverse paired with VNet1. The subscription contains the virtual machines shown in the following table. You have two virtual machines named VM1 and VM2. VM1 is connected to subnet 1 and VM2 is connected to subnet 2. The subscription contains the Azure App Service web apps shown in the following table. You have two web apps named Web App 1 and Web App 2. Web App 1 uses the premium pricing tier and has virtual network integration with VNet 1. And Web App 2 uses the isolated pricing tier and is deployed to subnet 2. For each of the following statements, select yes if the statement is true, otherwise select no. And the first statement is Web App 1 can communicate with VM2. Friends, let's first understand virtual network integration, as that's critical for answering this question, as Web App 1 has virtual network integration with VNet 1. Virtual network integration gives your app access to resources in your virtual network, but it doesn't grant inbound private access to your app from the virtual network. Private site access refers to making an app accessible only from a private network, such as from within an Azure virtual network. Virtual network integration is used only to make outbound calls from your app into your virtual network. The virtual network integration feature requires a supported basic or standard, premium, premium version 2, premium version 3, or elastic premium app service pricing tier. And the app which we have, which is Web App 1, is on a premium tier, so we are on the right requirement. Supports TCP and UDP, works with app service apps, function apps, and logic apps. There are some things that virtual network integration doesn't support, like mounting a drive, Windows Server Active Directory domain join, and NetBIOS. Virtual network integration supports connecting to a virtual network in the same region. Using virtual network integration enables your app to access resources in the virtual network you are integrated with. This is one of the things that you need to take into consideration while answering the question. Resources in virtual network peered to the virtual network your app is integrated with, including global peering connections, resources across Azure Express Route connections, service endpoint secured services, private endpoint enabled services. When you use virtual network integration, you can use the following Azure networking features. Again, one of these statements will help you in answering one of these statements that you will see in a while. Network security groups. You can block outbound traffic with a NSG that you use on your integration subnet. The inbound rules don't apply because you can't use virtual network integration to provide inbound access to your app. Route tables. You can place a route table on the integration subnet to send outbound traffic where you want. NAT gateway, you can use NAT gateway to get a dedicated outbound IP and mitigate SNAT port exhaustion. So friends, Web App 1 has VNet integration with VNet 1 and VNet 1 has peering configured with VNet 2, which is used by VM2. So Web App 1 can communicate with VM2. Now the next statement is NSG1 controls inbound traffic of Web App 1. Based on what we read, virtual network integration is used only to make outbound calls from your app into your virtual network. So this statement is incorrect. Let's look at third statement. Web App 2 can communicate with VM1. Web App 2 is deployed to subnet 2 and subnet 2 is in VNet 2. VNet 2 is paired with VNet 1, which VM1 is connected to. So Web App 2 can communicate with VM1. So friends, I hope this has given you clarity on how to answer such type of questions. But if you still have any doubts, please post them in the comment section. Friends, this is question number 201 of the series. You have an Azure subscription. you create the following file named deploy.json. In front of you, there is a ARM template. Basically, the ARM template, if you look at the type section, they are trying to create a storage account, and then the location of the storage account is set to the location of the resource group, as they have resource group.location in it. And the name of the storage account is dynamically generated. And how they are generating it, they are using concat function. Basically, concat function is to concatenate two different variables or parameters. And the first one is copy index, then they are concatenating it with storage, and then they are concatenating it with a unique string that is generated through the ID of the resource group. Now, the copy index is basically defined at the bottom. If you see the copy section, count is defined to 3. So there will be 3 storage accounts that will be created. The loop will iterate 3 times. And the iteration starts from 0 and goes to 2. So there will be 3 storage accounts. Name of the storage account would be 0, 1, 2, and then 0 would be followed by storage, and then that will be followed by a unique string which is generated by the resource group ID. And friends, if you are not specifying the location while creating the storage account, then the default location is defined as West US. Now let's look at next part of this question. You connect to the subscription and run the following commands. The first command is new-az resource group-name rg1-location central US. And the second command is new-az resource group deployment-resource group name is rg1-template file is deploy.json. So in the first command, you are trying to create a resource group. Then in the second command, you are trying to do a deployment using the deploy.json template, which we just saw, and it's going to create the resources in the resource group rg1, which was created in the previous step. Now for each of the following statements, select yes if the statement is true, otherwise select no. And the first statement is the commands will create 4 new resources. And my friends, that's correct. There will be 1 resource group and 3 storage accounts created, as I explained earlier. Now the next statement is the commands will create storage accounts in the West US Azure region. This is incorrect because in the template you had defined that the location of the storage accounts would be same as the location of the resource group. So in the command which you can see on your screen, when the resource group is created, the location of the resource group is Central US. So the storage accounts will be created in Central US location, not West US. And the third statement is the first storage account that is created will have a prefix of 0. You would obviously know this is correct because the template is using copy index and count is set to 3. So storage accounts will have a prefix of 0, 1, and 2. Let's head to Azure portal to try this practically and validate the answers. So friends, I am now in Azure portal. Let's try to do the deployment and see what is being created. So I have already opened Azure PowerShell. I'll copy the first command and try to run it. So the first command was new-az resource group-name-location, where name was rg1 and location was Central US. And you can see it has created a resource group with the name of rg1, location is Central US, and obviously the provisioning state says succeeded, and the resource group ID is shown on your screen now. Let's go to the resource groups and see whether it has got created or not. Refresh, you can see rg1 is now showing up on your screen. Now, before I go ahead and run the second command, I'll have to first upload the JSON file so that I can use it in this session. So what I'm going to do is I'll use this upload button here, and the deploy.json is already kept on my local. So I'll go ahead and upload it. So now since the upload has been done, let's now run the second command. It will take few minutes for the deployment to happen. So friends, as you can see, the command ran successfully. The deployment name is deploy. Resource group name where the resources got created is RG1. Provisioning state shows as succeeded. Timestamp is showing up here. The mode is showing up as incremental. And in the parameters, you can see location string West US was passed. Let's now try to refresh our resource group and see whether the resources got created or not. So you can see there are 3 storage accounts that have got created, and all the 3 storage accounts are using central US location. This is what confirms the location where storage accounts will be created. Now the 3 storage accounts, all the 3 storage accounts are starting with a prefix of 0, 1, and 2, and then followed by storage, and then followed by a unique string that was generated using the ID of the resource group. And you can see since all of these 3 storage accounts were deployed in the same resource group, that is why the suffix, which is the unique string that got generated, is same for all the 3 storage accounts. The only difference is they are starting with 0, 1, and 2 respectively. So this is question number 202 of the series. You need to configure a new Azure app service named Web App 1. The solution must meet the following requirements, and your requirements are Web App 1 must be able to verify a custom domain name of app.contoso.com. Web App 1 must be able to automatically scale up to 8 instances. Cost and administrative effort must be minimized. Which pricing plan should you choose, and which type of record should you use to verify the domain? So friends, this is one of the articles on Azure China website where they are comparing the different plans, different tiers of app service and their pricing and their features. So the first requirement was Web App 1 must be able to verify a custom domain name of app.contoso.com. And if I scroll down in the custom domain, you can see free tier does not support custom domain. That's why we can rule out free tier. Now let's look at the second requirement. Web App 1 must be able to automatically scale up to 8 instances. Now you can see in the maximum instances, shared again doesn't support anything in terms of scaling. So you can rule out shared as well from the pricing plan. Now the basic one supports up to 3. However, the requirement is up to 8 instances. So you can rule out basic as well and choose standard as the correct choice in case of pricing plan. And friends, the next part of the question was which type of record should you use to verify the domain? And your options are A record, 4 times A record, PTR record, and text record. Friends, in front of you is the verifying domain section of an Azure app service, and in the screenshot of the domain validation, you can see there are 2 options, CNAME and TXT. And in our case, TXT is one of the options, so TXT record type is the correct answer. But as you can see, you can also use CNAME for record validation. So this can be one of the variations of this question where you would have got CNAME in the list of options. So in that case, CNAME would be the correct answer. But in our case, at this point, TXT record is the correct answer. So friends, I hope you now understand why standard pricing plan and TXT record type are the correct answers here. But if you still have any doubts, please post them in the comment section. Question number 203. You have a Azure virtual network named VNet1 as shown in the exhibit. On the right hand side of your screen, there is an exhibit which shows the configuration of VNet1. Now the location of VNet1 is West US, resource group being used is production, subscription name is production subscription, address space is 10.2.0.0/16, DNS servers are Azure provided DNS service. No devices are connected to VNet1. You plan to peer VNet1 to another virtual network named VNet2. VNet2 has an address space of 10.2.0.0/16. You need to create the peering what should you do first? Your options are modify the address space of VNet 1, add a gateway subnet to VNet 1, create a subnet on VNet 1 and VNet 2, configure a service endpoint on VNet 2. Friends, key to answer this question is the address space of both VNet. You should already know that you can't peer two VNets with overlapping address spaces. And in this case, both the VNets being peered have same address space. So you modify the address space of VNet 1 before peering can be configured. Other option would be changing the address space of VNet 2, but that is not in the list of options. So there can be a variation in the options of this question. Question number 204. You have an Azure subscription that contains 10 virtual machines and the resources shown in the following table. Now the resources are VNet 1 and Bastion 1. VNet 1 is virtual network type. Bastion 1 is basic SKU Azure Bastion host, and the description is VNet 1 does not have any description and Bastion 1 has the description mentioning the subnet size is of subnet mask 26. You need to ensure that Bastion 1 can support 100 concurrent SSH users. The solution must minimize administrative effort. What should you do first? Your options are resize the subnet of Bastion 1, configure host scaling, create a network security group, upgrade Bastion 1 to the standard SKU. Friends, you need to make changes in Bastion configuration so it can support up to 100 concurrent SSH users, and to achieve this you will have to upgrade it to standard SKU. Let's understand how a standard SKU will fulfill this requirement. So friends, as you would already know, in our case, the tier of the Bastion host is selected as basic. So now I'm in Azure portal and I'm trying to create a Bastion host. And if I select tier as basic, you can see the instance count is default selected as 2 and I cannot move it. It is grayed out. So you only get 2 instances to support your Bastion connectivity if you are using basic SKU. And if I go to developer, you don't even get that, you just get 1. And if I select standard, you get instance count as up to 50. You can change it to 50. As I increase the instance count towards 50, you get a warning that Azure Bastion subnet does not have sufficient IP addresses to scale out additional instances. To fix this, please delete and recreate Azure Bastion with at least subnet mask 26 or larger subnet. This is the case for me because the subnet that I have selected does not fulfill the requirement, but you would have seen in our case the subnet is already having a subnet mask of 26. So this requirement is already met. Now you would be wondering, our requirement is 100 concurrent SSH users, but the instance count is only going till 50. So let's now understand the second part of this question, which will help you in choosing the correct answer. So as you can see, Bastion standard SKU can support 2 to 50 instances. To learn more, see instances and host scaling. So let's go to this link and understand it in more detail. So an instance is an optimized Azure VM that is created when you configure Azure Bastion. It's fully managed by Azure and runs all of the processes needed for Azure Bastion. An instance is also referred to as a scale unit. You connect to client VMs via Azure Bastion instance. When you configure Azure Bastion using the basic SKU, 2 instances are created. This is what we saw. It was grayed out and by default it was selected 2. If you use the standard SKU, you can specify the number of instances with a minimum of 2 instances. This is called host scaling. Now comes the next part. Each instance can support 20 concurrent RDP connections and 40 concurrent SSH connections for medium workload. So if you only have 2 instances, that means you can support up to 80 concurrent SSH connections using the basic SKU. However, our requirement is to have 100 concurrent SSH connections. That is why you'll have to upgrade Bastion to standard SKU. The number of connections per instance depends on what actions you are taking when connected to the client VM. For example, if you are doing something data intensive, it creates a larger load for the instance to process. Once the concurrent sessions are exceeded, another scale unit is required. So friends, I hope you now understand why option D has been chosen as the correct answer here. Question number 205. You have an Azure subscription that contains an Azure storage account named storage1 and the users shown in the following table. You have 3 users with the name of user 1, 2, and 3, and user 1 is member of group 1, user 2 is member of group 2, and user 3 is also member of group 1. You plan to monitor storage 1 and to configure email notifications for the signals shown in the following table. Now the signals are ingress, egress, delete storage account, and restore blob ranges. For ingress and egress, the type is metric, and for delete storage account and restore blob ranges, the type is activity log. The users to notify are: for ingress, you will notify user 1 and user 3. For egress, you need to notify user 1 only. For delete storage account, you need to modify user 1, 2, and 3. To restore blob ranges, you need to notify user 1 and user 3 only. You need to identify the minimum number of alert rules and action groups required for the planned monitoring. How many alert rules and action groups should you identify? And the first part of the question is alert rules, and your options are 1, 2, 3, and 4. Friends, you can define only one activity log signal per alert rule. And in our case, we have 4 signals, which are ingress, egress, delete storage account, and restore blob ranges. So you will create 4 alert rules. I hope you now understand why 4 has been chosen as the correct answer here. Let's look at next part, action groups. And again, you have 4 options, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Folks, look at the users to notify sections, and there are 3 different combinations of users. So you'll have to create 3 action groups. One for user 1 only, second one for user 1 and user 3 only, and another one for all 3 users. Question number 206 of the series. You have an Azure subscription that contains the vaults shown in the following table. You have 2 vaults with the name of backup 1 and recovery 1. Backup 1 is a backup vault and recovery 1 is a recovery services vault. You create a storage account that contains the resources shown in the following table. You have 2 resources with the name of cont1 and share1. Cont1 is a blob container type and share1 is a file share. To which vault can you backup cont1 and share1? Friends, let's head to Azure portal and try to create a vault in Backup Center and see what all data sources are supported by each of them, so we are better equipped to answer this question. So you can create a vault by going into the Backup Center and clicking on the plus in front of vault. You can see there are 2 options when you try to create a vault. You need to choose vault type, and the 2 options are Recovery Services Vault and Backup Vault. Now, in the Recovery Services Vault, you can see the supported data sources are Azure Virtual Machines, SQL in Azure VM, Azure Files, SAP HANA in Azure VM, Azure Backup Server, Azure Backup Agent, and DPM. When you select Backup Vault, your supported data sources are Azure Disks, Azure Blobs, Azure Database for PostgreSQL Servers, Kubernetes Services, Azure Database for PostgreSQL Flexible Servers, which are in preview at the moment. So friends, based on this information, let's go back to our slide and try to answer the questions. So cont1 here is a blob container, and you will be able to back it up to a backup vault. So therefore, the correct answer here is backup 1 only. Now the next part of the question is share1. Share1 is a file share type, and based on the information we just saw in the Azure portal, you will be able to back it up to Recovery Services Vault only. Therefore, the correct answer is Recovery 1 only. Question number 207. You create a virtual machine scale set named scale 1. Scale 1 is configured as shown in the following exhibit. So there is an exhibit on the right hand side of your screen and we are looking at the scaling section of it. And you can see initial instance count is set to 4. That means when the virtual machine scale set is initialized, you will have 4 virtual machines to start with. Then you have scaling policies defined and the policies are custom, and it also tells the minimum number of VMs at a time in the virtual machine scale set would be 2 and the maximum number of virtual machines at a time would be 20. Now the scale out thresholds are set as CPU threshold needs to be more than 80% for a continuous duration of 5 minutes. And when this situation happens, the number of VMs will increase by 2. And when it comes to scale in, if the CPU utilization is less than 30%, the number of VMs to decrease by is 4. And diagnostic logs is set to be disabled. Now, coming back to our question, use the drop-down menus to select the answer choice that completes each statement based on the information presented in the graphic. And your first statement is, if scale 1 is utilized at 85% for 6 minutes after it is deployed, scale 1 will be running how many virtual machines? And your options are 2, 4, 6, 10, or 20. In this case, the scale out rule will apply, and the scale out rule increases the number of VMs by 2 if the CPU threshold is 80% or higher for 5 minutes. And in this case, it has been at 85% for 6 minutes. So it will increase the VMs by 2. That means the initial instance count is 4. So scale 1 will be running at 6 virtual machines after 6 minutes. And the next part of the question is, if scale 1 is utilized at 25% for 6 minutes after it is deployed and then utilized at 50% for 6 minutes, scale 1 will be running at, again, you have the same options of whether it's 2, 4, 6, 10 or 20 virtual machines. So as you already know, initial VM count is 4 and here scale in will kick in as the CPU utilization, which is at 25%, is less than the defined 30% for continuous 6 minutes. So scale out will try to decrease VM count by 4, but that makes it 0 and minimum number of VMs is set to 2. Therefore, it cannot reduce it below 2. So scale 1 will be running at 2 virtual machines in this case. So friends, you don't really need to memorize these type of questions. You always need to pay attention towards the scale in and scale out rules. And you also need to factor in what are the minimum number of and the maximum number of VMs defined. And then the last thing you need to understand is what is the initial instance count. Let's look at question number 208. You have an Azure subscription named subscription 1 that has the following providers registered, and the providers are authorization, automation, resources, compute, key vault, network, storage, billing, and web. Subscription 1 contains an Azure virtual machine named VM1 that has the following configurations. Private IP address is defined as a dynamic and it is currently set to 10.0.0.4. Network security group is NSG1. Public IP address does not exist. Availability set name is AV set. And the subnet is 10.0.0.0/24. There are no managed disks and the location is East US. You need to record all the successful and failed connection attempts to VM1. Which 3 actions should you perform? And your options are: enable Azure Network Watcher in the East US Azure region, add an Azure Network Watcher connection monitor, register the Microsoft Log Analytics provider, create an Azure storage account, register the Microsoft.Insights resource provider, enable Azure Network Watcher flow logs. And my friends, the correct answer here are option D, E, and F. You will create an Azure storage account, you will register the Microsoft.Insights resource provider, and you will enable Azure Network Watcher flow logs. So friends, if you are enjoying the content, do not forget to hit the like button and subscribe the channel. This is question number 209. You have an Azure subscription that contains the resource groups shown in the following table. You have two resource groups with the name of RG1 and RG2, and the location of RG1 is East US and the location of RG2 is West US. You create the following Azure Resource Manager template named deploy.json. Now in front of you, there is the ARM template. Let's try to understand the ARM template. In the resources section, in the types, you see Microsoft.resources/resource group. That means this template is going to create resource groups. And the location of the resource groups would be East US. And when it comes to name, they are trying to concatenate things. Basically, concatenate things is they have defined few things and they are trying to combine them to each other. Now, in the name, first thing that is getting concatenated is RG. And then they are trying to use copy index. And if you look at the bottom of the template, the count is defined to 4. That means this loop is going to iterate 4 times and iteration starts from 0. Therefore, the resources that will be created by this ARM template would be 4 resource group with the name of RG0, RG1, RG2, and RG3. Friends, I hope you now understand what is this template all about and what is going to be created when this template is executed. Let's look at next part of the question. You deploy the template by running the following command. Let new-az subscription deployment location is set to West US and template file is set to deploy.json. You are doing this command is doing a deployment at subscription level. Now for each of the following statements, select yes if the statement is true, otherwise select no. And the first statement is the template creates a resource group named RG0 in the East US Azure region. And friends, this statement is correct. The template will create a resource group named RG0 in East US Azure region. You might be confused by West US location in the command being executed, but that is the location where metadata of the deployment is going to be stored. Let's look at statement 2. The template creates 4 new resource groups. No, this statement is incorrect. Template is written in a way that it will try to create 4 resource groups with name RG0, RG1, RG2, and RG3. But you should also see in the question it was already mentioned that RG1 and RG2 already exists. So it will fail to create them. And the third statement is the template creates a resource group named RG3 in the West US Azure region. And my friends, this statement is incorrect. It will create a resource group named RG3 but in East US location. Let's head to Azure portal and try to deploy the template to validate the answers. Friends, we are now in Azure portal and I'm trying to mimic the situation that was given in the question. So I have already created 2 resource group with the name of RG1 and RG2. And as per the question, RG1 is using East US location and then RG2 is using West US location. So now we are going to use Azure PowerShell to deploy the ARM template that was given in the question. So what I've done, the ARM template is already saved on my local. I'll use this upload button to upload the ARM template in my session. On the right hand side, you can see the upload got completed successfully in my home drive. Now I will run the command. So it will take few minutes for the deployment to happen as it's going to iterate through the loops and then come back with the results. So let's give it few minutes. So friends, as expected, the deployment had issues and therefore the provisioning state has failed. And you can see the error message, the new-az deployment. The deploy failed with error showing 1 out of 1 errors. And the status message is invalid resource group location East US. The resource group already exists in location West US. Now let's head to our subscription to actually see whether how many resource groups got created. So you can see when I hit the refresh button, there are 4 resource groups now: RG0, RG1, RG2, and RG3, whereas RG1 and RG2 were already existing. So it only created RG0 and RG3, and both the resources got created in East US location. Now let's try to go at the subscription level and see what was the failure that happened, so we have a better idea on what was happening in the background. And if you are, because we were doing the deployment on the subscription level, that is why we are going and checking the deployment logs at subscription level. If the deployment was happening at a resource group level, then we would have gone in a resource group. So here you can see deployment named deploy is already there. It was just done few minutes back. It took 6 seconds and 528 milliseconds for execution. Let's click on deploy and see what actually happened. So this is the same one, and here you can see for RG3 it says got created successfully. For RG0 it says it got created successfully. Now interestingly, it shows at RG1 a green tick, but in the status it shows okay. What this signifies is it was matching the state of the resource group being created with the existing resources, and it found that a similar resource in similar location already exists, so it marked it as already existing. But for RG2 it gave an error because RG2 was existing in a different location, which was West US, and we were trying to create another one in the East US. This also tells you that you cannot have 2 resource groups with the same name even though they are in different locations. But overall, we know that deployment is not going to create 4 resource groups, which is what was asked in the question. So friends, I hope this has given you clarity on why the options were chosen as the right answer. But if you still have any doubts, please post them in the comments section. This is question number 210 of the series. You plan to create the Azure web apps shown in the following table. There are 4 web apps that you are trying to create: Web App 1, Web App 2, Web App 3, and Web App 4. The runtime stack for Web App 1 is .NET 6 LTS. The runtime stack for Web App 2 is ASP.NET version 4.8. And the runtime stack for Web App 3 is PHP 8.2. And the runtime stack for Web App 4 is Python 3.11. What is the minimum number of app service plans you should create for the web apps? And your options are 1, 2, 3, and 4. You'll have to create 2 app service plans in this case. Let's again head to Azure portal to understand the reason behind choosing 2 as the correct answer. So friends, I am now in the app services section in the Azure portal. Let's try to create a web app and see what all options are supported. Now, if I try to select the runtime stack as .NET 6 LTS, which was the first web app runtime stack, you can see Windows is selected by default, but Linux operating system is also supported. Now, why we are looking at the operating system here? Because when you select any operating system, you get a app service plan. Now, if you are selecting Linux operating system, you will have to choose a Linux app plan. If you choose a Windows, you will have to choose a Windows plan. So you cannot create an app which is explicitly supported by Windows operating system and run it in a Linux plan. But for .NET 6 LTS, as you can see, both operating systems are supported, so we can use any app service plan for this case. And the second web app was ASP.NET 4.8. Let's try to choose that. When you choose ASP.NET 4.8, you can see Windows is selected by default, which is good, but Linux is grayed out. So it is not supported on Linux. Let's try to select the third runtime stack, which was PHP 8.2. So if we select PHP 8.2, by default, Linux gets selected and Windows is grayed out. So it is not supported on Windows. and the third one was Python 3.11. And just like PHP 8.2, it is also only supported on Linux. So in this case, you will have to create two plans, two app service plans. One would be a Linux plan to run PHP 8.2 and Python 3.11 web apps, and another would be a Windows plan to run ASP.NET 4.8 app. Now the remaining one was .NET 6 LTS, which is supported on both. So you could use either of the plans to run that runtime stack. Question number 211 of the series. You have an Azure subscription that contains the resources shown in the following table. You have three resources with the name of VNet1, IP1, and RT1. VNet1 is a virtual network type and is hosted in East US location. IP1 is a public IP address type and is hosted in West Europe location. RT1 is a route table type and is hosted in North Europe location. You need to create a network interface named NIC1. In which location can you create NIC1? And your options are East US and North Europe only, East US only, East US, West US, and North Europe, East US and West Europe only. And the correct answer here is option B, East US only. As always, let's look at factors which contribute to choosing this option. So friends, we are now in the network interface wizard in Azure portal. Let's try to create a network interface. Let's choose an existing resource group. And now here you can see when you are creating a network interface, virtual network is something which is mandatory out of the three resources that already exist. So this is the resource that plays a key role in choosing which option is correct. Now, if you click here, only the virtual networks in the currently selected subscription, location, and extended locations are listed. So what does it mean? That the network interface and virtual network need to be in same location. So let's try to validate this theory. So what we'll do is we'll try to create a virtual network first to mimic the scenario in the question, and then we will come back to the network interface wizard and see how it looks like. So we are now in the virtual network wizard. Let's try to create a virtual network. So here you just need to choose the resource group, and then let's give virtual network as a test VNet name. And let's choose region as Central India. So it's running a validation at the moment. Once the validation is done, we should be able to hit click, which we have done just now. It should take few seconds to do the deployment, and then we will go back in the network interface wizard to see how things are behaving. So friends, the deployment has got completed. As you can see on the right hand side of your screen, you can also see here a green tick. Let's go to resource and see the test VNet got created. In the location, you can see it was created in the Central India location. So what we'll try to do now is we will go in the network interface wizard and try to create a network interface. Let's choose our resource group, which is Cloud Shell 1407. And now by default, it has selected Southeast Asia location. And in the virtual network, you can see it's creating a new virtual network. And if I check the drop down, there is no virtual network shown here. And that's the reason we have chosen option B as the correct answer here, because VNet1 was in East US location, so you will have to create virtual network interface as well in the East US location. Let's try to validate that theory. Let's change the region to Central India. And as soon as you change the location to Central India and try to open the drop down, you can see the test VNet1 which you created earlier. This validates the theory that your network interface and virtual network need to be in the same region, and which is the reason why East US has been chosen as the right answer. Question number 212 of the series. You have an on-premise server that contains a folder named D folder 1. You need to copy the contents of D folder 1 to the public container in an Azure storage account named Contoso data. Which command should you run? And your options are AZ storage blob copy start, D folder 1, https contoso data.blob.core.windows.net/public. The second option is AZ copy sync, D folder 1, then https contoso data.blob.core.windows.net/public -snapshot. Third option is AZ copy D folder 1, https contoso data.blob.core.windows.net/public -recursive. And the fourth option is AZ storage blob copy start batch D folder 1, https contoso data.blob.core.windows.net/public. And friends, the correct answer here is option C. You will have to use the recursive flag here, which indicates that the command should recursively copy all the files and folders within D folder 1 to the specified destination in the Azure storage account. Question number 213. You have an Azure app service named app1 that contains 2 running instances. You have an auto scale rule configured as shown in the following exhibit on the right-hand side of your screen. For the instance limits scale condition setting, you set maximum to 5. During a 30-minute period, app1 uses 80% of the available memory. What is the maximum number of instances for app1 during the 30-minute period? And your options are 2, 3, 4, or 5. Friends, let's first understand the auto scale rule configured. So if the trigger condition, which in this case memory, is more than 70% for 15 minutes continuously, then the instance count will increase by 1. And then there is a cooldown defined of 5 minutes. It's important to understand cooldown to get this question right. Cooldown period is the amount of time to wait after a scale operation before scaling again. So for instance, if first scale event happened after 15 minutes of 80% memory, it will wait for 5 minutes for metrics to stabilize and then scaling will happen again. Based on the condition in our question, first scaling will happen at 15 minutes and instance will increase by 1. Since the initial instance count is 2, so you will have 3 instances after 15 minutes. Now it will wait for 5 minutes before scaling again. So at 20 minutes, instance count will be 4. And then at 25, it will be 5. And then at 30, it will again try to scale, but maximum instance is set to 5. So 5 would be the correct answer here. Because it cannot scale any further and will remain at 5, no matter for how long memory utilization stays at 80%. This is question number 214. You plan to back up an Azure virtual machine named VM1. You discover that the backup pre-check status displays a status of warning. What is the possible cause of the warning status? And your options are VM1 is stopped, VM1 does not have the latest version of Azure VM agent, which is WA app agent.exe installed, VM1 has an unmanaged disk, a recovery services vault is unavailable. The possible cause of the warning status in the backup pre-check for an Azure virtual machine named VM1 can be that VM1 does not have the latest version of the Azure VM agent installed. Having an outdated or incompatible version of the Azure VM agent could lead to warnings during the backup pre-check process. It's essential to ensure that VM1 has the latest version of the Azure VM agent installed to ensure compatibility and successful backup operations. Folks, this is question number 215. You have 2 Azure virtual machines named VM1 and VM2 that run Windows Server. The virtual machines are in a subnet named subnet 1. Subnet 1 is in a virtual network named VNet 1. You need to prevent VM1 from accessing VM2 on port 3389. What should you do? And your options are: create a network security group that has an outbound security rule to deny destination port 3389 and apply the NSG to the network interface of VM1. Second option is configure Azure Bastion in VNet 1. Third option is create a network security group that has an outbound security rule to deny source port 3389 and apply the NSG to subnet 1. Fourth option is create a network security group that has an inbound security rule to deny source port 3389 and apply the NSG to subnet 1. And folks, the correct answer here, which fulfills the requirement, is option A. Create a network security group that has an outbound security rule to deny destination port 3389 and apply the NSG to the network interface of VM1. However, I would never do that unless the requirement is to deny all connectivity on port 3389, as this rule will not only prevent VM1 from accessing VM2 on port 3389, but it won't be able to access any VM on port 3389 as there is no filter on destination address defined. Question number 216. You have an existing Azure subscription that contains 10 virtual machines. You need to monitor the latency between your on-premise network and the virtual machines. What should you use? Your options are service map, connection troubleshoot, connection monitor, effective routes. And friends, the correct answer here is option C, connection monitor. So friends, let's read through some of the common use cases of connection monitor, as you should be prepared if you get some variations of this question in the exam. Your front-end web server virtual machine or virtual machine scale set communicates with a database server VM in a multi-tier application. You want to check network connectivity between the two VMs or scale set. The second use case is you want VMs scale sets in, for example, the East US region to ping VM scale sets in Central US region, and you want to compare cross-region network latencies. You have multiple on-premise office sites, one in Seattle, Washington, for example, and another in Ashburn, Virginia. Your office sites connect to Microsoft 365 URLs. For your users of Microsoft 365 URLs, you want to compare the latencies between Seattle and Ashburn. Your hybrid application needs connectivity to an Azure storage account endpoint. Your on-premise site and your Azure application connect to the same endpoint. You want to compare the latencies of the on-premise sites with the latencies of the Azure application. You want to check the connectivity between your on-premise setups and the Azure VM's virtual machine scale sets that host your cloud application. You want to check the connectivity from single or multiple instances of an Azure virtual machine scale set to your Azure or non-Azure multi-tier application. So friends, I hope you now understand some of the common use cases of connection monitor and would be able to resolve questions if you get any new questions based on the use cases of connection monitor. Let's now understand how you create a connection monitor. In connection monitors that you create in connection monitor, you can add both on-premise machines and Azure VMs scale sets as sources. This is what we already know, as in our case, we are using the connection monitor to monitor the latency between the on-premise network and virtual machines that are hosted in Azure. These connection monitors can also monitor connectivity to endpoints. The endpoints can be on an Azure or any other URL or IP address. Connection monitor includes the following entities. The first one is connection monitor resource, a region-specific Azure resource. All the following entities are properties of a connection monitor resource. Then it has an endpoint, a source or destination that participates in connectivity checks. Examples of endpoints include Azure VM, scale sets, or on-premise agents, URLs, and IP addresses. Test configuration. A protocol is specific configuration for a test. Based on the protocol you select, you can define the port, thresholds, test frequency, and other properties. Test group, the group that contains source endpoints, destination endpoints, and test configurations. A connection monitor can contain more than one test group. And then finally, test, the combination of a source endpoint, destination endpoint, and test configuration. A test is the most granular level at which monitoring data is available. The monitoring data includes the percentage of checks that failed and the round trip time, which is RTT. Question number 217. You have an Azure subscription. The subscription contains virtual machines that connect to a virtual network named VNet1. You plan to configure Azure Monitor for VM Insights. You need to ensure that all the virtual machines only communicate with Azure Monitor through VNet1. What should you create first? Your options are a data collection rule, a log analytics workspace, an Azure Monitor private link scope, which is AMPLS, a private endpoint. And folks, the correct answer here is option C, an Azure Monitor private link scope. With Azure Private Link, you can securely link Azure Platform as a Service resources to your virtual network by using private endpoints. Azure Monitor is a constellation of different interconnected services that work together to monitor your workloads. An Azure Monitor Private Link connects a private endpoint to a set of Azure Monitor resources to define the boundaries of your monitoring network. That set is called as Azure Monitor Private Link Scope, which is AMPLS. I hope you now understand why AMPLS has been chosen as the correct answer here. With private link, you can connect privately to Azure Monitor without opening up any public network access. Ensure your monitoring data is only accessed through authorized private networks. Prevent data exfiltration from your private networks by defining specific Azure Monitor resources that connect through your private endpoints. Securely connect your private on-premise network to Azure Monitor by using Azure Express Route and Private Link. Keep all traffic inside the Azure backbone network. Question number 218. You have an Azure subscription. You plan to use Azure Resource Manager templates to deploy 50 Azure virtual machines that will be part of the same availability set. You need to ensure that as many virtual machines as possible are available if the fabric fails or during servicing. How should you configure the template? In front of you is a template in which you can see the type denotes that availability sets are being created, and the location of the availability set is East US. In the properties, it is defined that platform fault domain count and platform form update counts are to be determined. So based on this, the question is, how many platform fault domain count and how many platform update domain count should you choose? And friends, the correct answers here are 3 fault domain count and 20 update domain count. So friends, let's understand the reason behind choosing platform fault domain count as 3 and platform update domain count as 20 as the correct answer in this case. How do availability sets work? Each virtual machine in your availability set is assigned an update domain and a fault domain by the underlying Azure platform. Each availability set can be configured with up to 3 fault domains and 20 update domains. What this means is, in the options, in the options of the platform fault domain count, you had options as 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So automatically you will rule out option 4. And similarly for platform update domain count, you had options as 10, 20, 25, 30, 40, 45. And you can only have a maximum of 20 update domains. So that means you will rule out the last 4 options and you are left with only 10 and 20. Now these configurations can't be changed once the availability set has been created. Update domains indicate group of virtual machines and underlying physical hardware that can be rebooted at the same time. When more than 5 virtual machines are configured within an availability set with 5 update domains, the 6th virtual machine is placed into the same update domain as the first virtual machine, the 7th in the same update domain as the second virtual machine, and so on. The order of update domains being rebooted may not proceed sequentially during planned maintenance, but only one update domain is rebooted at a time. A rebooted update domain is given 30 minutes to recover before maintenance is initiated on a different update domain. So friends, this is the reason we have chosen 20 update domains as the correct answer, because that's the maximum that can be configured. In our case, because we have 50 virtual machines. If we had less virtual machines, obviously, if virtual machines were less than 20, then you couldn't have chosen platform update domain count as 20. So make a note that if the number of virtual machines changes in the question, then your answer to this question will also change. Now let's understand the reason behind choosing 3 fault domains as the correct answer. Fault domains define the group of virtual machines that share a common power source and network switch. By default, the virtual machines configured within your availability set are separated across up to 3 fault domains. While placing your virtual machine in an availability set doesn't protect your application from operating system or application specific failures, it does limit the impact of potential physical hardware failures, network outages, or power interruptions. So friends, platform fault domain count has been chosen as 3 because that's the maximum value available. And since you are dealing with 50 virtual machines, so you can split them in the 3 fault domains. For example, if the question had just 2 virtual machines, so you couldn't have chosen 3 fault domain count as the correct answer. So again, if the count of virtual machines changes, then your fault domain count and update domain count also changes. So whenever you have such questions, please try to see carefully that how many virtual machines you are dealing with. Question number 219. You have an app named App1 that is installed on 2 Azure virtual machines named VM1 and VM2. Connections to App1 are managed by using an Azure load balancer. The effective network security configuration for VM2 are shown in the following exhibit. In front of you is the VM2 networking exhibit, and you can see there are some inbound port rules defined. Whenever you have such questions, you need to be aware that the inbound port rules or any port rules are evaluated in the order of their priority. That means the rule which has 100 priority will be evaluated first, and the rule which has 65,500 priority in this case will be evaluated at the end. So the rule with priority 100 says allow 131.107.100.50 on port 443. Any connectivity that is coming from source with IP address 131.107.100.50 on port 443 is allowed. Similarly, the rule 200, which is a deny rule, says any connectivity from any source on port 443 is denied. So because rule with priority 100 is going to be evaluated first, only the connectivity from 131.107.100.50 on port 443 will be allowed, rest will be denied. Now let's look at next part of this question. You discover that connections to app1 from 131.107.100.50 over TCP for port 443 fail. You verify that the load balancer rules are configured correctly. You need to ensure that connections to app1 can be established successfully from 131.107.100.50 over TCP port 443. can see in the solution, they have said you modify the priority of the allow underscore 131.107.100.50 inbound security rule. Does this solution meet the goal? You need to tell whether it is right or wrong. So as I explained, this rule is already having priority of 100, which means it is at the highest priority. Changing the priority of this rule will not make any difference because it is already a allow rule with the highest priority. So friends, this solution is incorrect. What you need to do here is start the VM, and how I know that it is from the attached network interface option, which is enabled and highlighted on your screen now. If the VM was on, then it should have been showing as detached network option as enabled, which is currently grayed out. So basically, there is nothing to do with firewall rules in this case because the rules are set in the correct priority. It's just that the VM is in off state and you need to power on the VM. So there can be a variation to this question in the solution. They might have power on the virtual machine VM2, and that would have been the correct solution in this case. Next question. You have an Azure subscription that contains the virtual network shown in the following table. You have 3 virtual networks with the name of VNet1, VNet2, and VNet3. VNet1 is hosted in West Europe location. VNet2 is hosted in Southeast Asia location. VNet3 is hosted in South Central US location. The subscription contains the subnets shown in the following table. You have 4 subnets with the name of subnet 1, subnet 2, subnet 3, and subnet 4. Subnet 1 is connected to VNet 1, subnet 2 is connected to VNet 2, subnet 3 is connected to VNet 3, and subnet 4 is connected to VNet 4. The service endpoints for subnet 2 and subnet 3 are Microsoft.storage, and subnet 1 and subnet 4 do not have any service endpoint. The subscription contains the storage accounts shown in the following table. There are 3 storage accounts with the name of storage 1, which is in West Europe location and is of type storage version 2. And then you have another storage account with the name of storage 2, which is hosted in South Central US location with a kind of blob storage. Then the third storage, which is storage 3, is hosted in Southeast Asia location and is of kind storage V2. You create a service endpoint policy named policy 1 in the South Central US Azure region to allow connectivity to all the storage accounts in the subscription. For each of the following statements, select yes if the statement is true, otherwise select no. And the first statement is policy 1 can be applied to subnet 3. And friends, this statement is correct. Both policy 1 and subnet 3 are in same region, which is South Central US. That's why you can apply policy 1 to subnet 3. Friends, these are some of the limitations that have been taken into consideration when marking statement 1 as the correct. You can only deploy service endpoint policies on virtual networks deployed through the Azure Resource Manager deployment model. Virtual networks must be in the same region as the service endpoint policy. This is what marked the first statement as the correct answer. You can only apply service endpoint policy on a subnet if service endpoints are configured for the Azure services listed in the policy. You can't use service endpoint policies for traffic from your on-premise network to Azure services. Azure managed services other than Azure SQL managed instance don't currently support endpoint policies. This limitation includes managed services deployed into shared subnets such as Azure Batch, Microsoft Entra Domain Services, Azure Application Gateway, Azure VPN Gateway, Azure Firewall, or into dedicated subnets such as Azure App Service Environment, Azure Redis Cache, Azure API Management, Classic Management Services. Classic storage accounts are not supported in endpoint policies. Policies deny access to all classic storage accounts by default. If your application needs access to Azure Resource Manager and classic storage accounts, endpoint policies shouldn't be used for this traffic. So the second statement is only storage 1 and storage 2 can be accessed from VNet 2. Now, if you noticed, question says policy has been created but doesn't say it has been applied. And if no policies are attached to a subnet with endpoints, you can access all storage accounts in the service. Therefore, this statement is incorrect because you will be able to access storage 3 as well from VNet 2. So as always, let's read through the configuration section so you know what you need to answer when there are variations of this question in the exam. You can configure the endpoint policies to restrict virtual network traffic to specific Azure storage accounts. Endpoint policy is configured on a subnet in a virtual network. Service endpoints for Azure storage should be enabled on the subnet to apply the policy. Endpoint policy allows you to add specific Azure storage accounts to allow list using the resource ID format. You can restrict access to all storage accounts in a subscription, all storage accounts in a resource group, an individual storage account by listing the corresponding Azure Resource Manager resource ID. This covers traffic to blobs, tables, queues, files, and Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 2. By default, if no policies are attached to a subnet with endpoints, you can access all storage accounts in the service. Once a policy is configured on that subnet, only the resources specified in the policy can be accessed from compute instances in that subnet. Access to all other storage accounts is denied. So friends, this is the reason we have chosen that the statement 2 is incorrect, because even though question mentions that the policy was created, but it never said that the policy was applied. Now, the next configuration thing is when service endpoint policies are applied on a subnet, the Azure Storage Service Endpoint scope gets upgraded from regional to global. This process means that all the traffic to Azure storage is secured over service endpoint thereafter. The service endpoint policies are also applicable globally. Any storage accounts that are not explicitly allowed are denied access. You can apply multiple policies to a subnet. When multiple policies are applied to the subnet, virtual network traffic to resources specified across any of these policies are allowed. Access to all other service resources not specified in any of the policies are denied. Only storage account using the Azure resource model can be specified in the endpoint policy. Classic storage accounts don't support Azure service endpoint policies. This is what we read in the limitation section as well. RAGRS secondary access is automatically allowed if the primary account is listed. This is a good thing to know if you get any questions around RAGRS and then service endpoint policy, so you know what is the scenario that will be presented. Storage accounts can be in the same or a different subscription or Microsoft Entra tenant as the virtual network. So friends, the third statement is only storage 2 can be accessed from VNet 3. For the very same reason that policy 1 is not applied, this statement is also incorrect. Storage 1, storage 2, and storage 3 all will be accessible from VNet 3. Question number 221. You have an Azure subscription that contains the identities shown in the following table. You have 4 identities, of which 2 are users with the name of user 1 and user 2, and 2 are managed identity with the name of principal 1 and principal 2. User 2 is the member of group 1 and principal 2 is also the member of group 1. User 1, principal 1 and group 1 are assigned the monitoring reader role. An action group named AZ-1 has the email Azure Resource Manager role notification type and is configured to email the monitoring reader role. You create an alert rule named alert1 that uses AZ-1. AZ-1 is the action group. You need to identify who will receive an email notification when alert1 is triggered. Who should you identify? Your options are user 1 and principal 1 only, user 1, user 2, principal 1 and principal 2, user 1 only, user 1 and user 2 only. And friends, the correct answer here is option D, user 1 and user 2 only. So friends, to understand the reason behind choosing option D as the correct answer, let's first understand monitoring reader role, which was being assigned in this case. People assigned the monitoring reader role can view all monitoring data in a subscription but cannot modify any resources or edit any settings related to monitoring resources. This role is appropriate for users in an organization such as support or operation engineers who need to view monitoring dashboards in Azure portal, view alert rules defined in Azure Alerts, query Azure Monitor metrics by using the Azure Monitor REST API, PowerShell commandlets, or cross-platform CLI, query the activity log by using the portal Azure Monitor REST API, PowerShell commandlets, or cross-platform CLI, view the diagnostic settings for a resource, view the log profile for a subscription, view auto-scale settings, view alert activity and settings, search log analytics workspace data, including usage data for the workspaces, retrieve the table schemas in a log analytics workspace, retrieve and execute log queries in a log analytics workspace, access application insights data. So friends, now you know what is monitoring reader role, and you should also know that it is an inbuilt subscription role and not an Azure or Entra ID role that you have created. Let's now understand the next part of the requirement, that how Azure Resource Manager sends the emails, which has helped us in answering this question. So this is the email Azure Resource Manager document. When you use Azure Resource Manager for email notifications, you can send email to the members of a subscription role. This is critical to answering this question. You can send email to the members of a subscription role. Email is only sent to Microsoft Entra ID user members of the role. Email is not sent to Microsoft Entra groups or service principals. So for these very reasons which are highlighted on your screen, Principal 2 is not going to get the email. Neither Principal 1 is going to get email because they are managed identities and not the users. And since user 2 is part of group 1, so it is also going to get the email notification. That is the reason we have chosen option D as the correct answer, where user 1 and user 2 are only going to get the email notification. Question number 222. You have an Azure subscription that contains the identities shown in the following table. You have two apps with the name of App 1 and App 2. App 1 is using Microsoft ASP.NET Web Framework and App 2 is using Microsoft ASP.NET Core Framework. And when it comes to hosting environment, App 1 is hosted on an on-premise physical server that runs Windows Server 2019 and has IaaS configured, whereas App 2 is hosted on an Azure virtual machine that runs Windows Server 2019 and has IaaS configured. You need to monitor the performance and usage of the apps by using Azure Application Insights. The solution must minimize modifications to the application code. What should you do on each app? And for App 1, the options are install the Log Analytics agent, install the Azure Monitor agent, use the Application Insights SDK, install the Application Insight agent. And friends, the correct answer here is install the Application Insights agent. Let's look at the second part of this question, and which is App 2, and your options are also same here. And friends, the answer will also be same, that is install the Application Insight agent. Application Insight agent can be used to monitor the performance and usage of both your on-premise physical servers and your Azure virtual machine as well, which means you can install the Application Insight agents on an on-premise server which is connected to Azure, and you can also install it on a Azure virtual machine. Question number 223. You have a computer named Computer 1 that has a point-to-site VPN connection to an Azure virtual network named VNet1. The point-to-site connection uses a self-signed certificate. From Azure, you download and install the VPN client configuration package on a computer named Computer 2. You need to ensure that you can establish a point-to-site VPN connection to VNet1 from Computer 2. And the solution you choose is you join computer 2 to Azure Active Directory. Does the solution meet the goal? You need to tell whether yes or no. Joining computer 2 to Azure Active Directory or Entra ID does not address the issue of establishing a point-to-site VPN connection to VNet 1 from computer 2. To ensure that you can establish a point-to-site VPN connection to VNet 1 from computer 2, you need to import or install the self-signed certificate used for the point-to-site VPN connection on computer 2. Simply joining computer 2 to Azure AD won't automatically handle the VPN connection setup. Friends, this is question number 224. You create an Azure VM named VM1 that runs Windows Server 2019. VM1 is configured as shown in the exhibit. In front of you is an exhibit where you can see the status of the VM is stopped deallocated. Location is East US and Zone 1 is the availability zone that is configured. Operating system is Windows and the size is standard DS1v2. You can see it has a public IP address assigned and the DNS name is not configured. You need to enable desired state configuration for VM1. What should you do first? Connect to VM1, start VM1, capture a snapshot of VM1, configure a DNS name for VM1. And friends, you will have to start the VM1 first. You could see that the status was stopped deallocated, and if you need to enable desired state configuration on any VM, it should be powered on. Now on your screen is a link. If you would like to understand more about desired state configuration, go to this link and read about it. You have an Azure subscription that contains the virtual networks shown in the following table. You have 4 virtual networks with the name of VNet 1, VNet 2, VNet 3, and VNet 4, of which VNet 1 and VNet 4 are using West US Azure region, and VNet 2 and VNet 3 are using Central US Azure region. VNet 1 and VNet 2 are hosted in resource group RG1 and VNet 3 and VNet 4 are hosted in resource group RG2. You need to deploy an Azure firewall named AF1 to RG1 in the West US Azure region. To which virtual networks can you deploy AF1? Your options are all the 4 virtual networks, Virtual Network 1 and Virtual Network 2 only, Virtual Network 1, Virtual Network 1, 2, and 4 only, and Virtual Network 1 and 4 only. And friends, the correct answer here is option C, Virtual Network 1 only. The firewall, virtual network, and the public IP address all must be in the same Azure resource group and same region. So friends, to validate the answer, what I have done here is I have created 2 resource groups with the name of RG1 and RG2. And as per the question statement, RG1 has 2 virtual networks created by the name of VNet 1 and VNet 2. And similarly, based on the question, VNet 1 is using West US location and VNet 2 is using Central US location. Now, if we go and look at RG2, I have created 2 virtual networks here as well by the name of VNet 3 and VNet 4. VNet 3 is again using Central US location and VNet 4 is using West US location. Now, what we will do is we will try to create a firewall and see what all options are available. Now, as per the description or as per the statement in the question, it says to create the firewall in RG1. So I'll use any of the virtual networks for RG1 and try to create a firewall. For instance, let's use VNet 1, which is the correct answer in our case, and see what are the options we are seeing. So we will go to the firewall option in the VNet 1 and click here to add a new firewall. So as you can see, resource group is by default selected as RG1 and region by default is coming as Southeast Asia, because that's the region where I am currently. But we are not really concerned about that. What we are concerned about is, let's see what are options that are available when we try to choose a virtual network. So we are not going to create a new virtual network. We are going to use an existing virtual network. And as soon as I select use existing, now you have a drop down to select virtual networks. And here there is no option available. And the reason is because we have not changed the region yet. So let's change the region to Central US first. So once the region has been changed to Central US, let's see what are options available. Now you can see there are two options here available, which are RG1 and RG2, which is VNet 2 and VNet 3. So basically the firewall that you are trying to create can only use the virtual networks VNet 2 and VNet 3. Okay, so let's try to select VNet 2 here, and now you get a message here that the virtual network must have a subnet named Azure Firewall subnet, which can be ignored because I have just created the virtual networks and not configured. So that means you can use virtual network 2 only if you are using Central US location. Now let's try to select virtual network 3 here, and you can see the Azure firewall cannot be used with from a different resource group. I think Azure has a typo here. This error is not very well formed, but what they are trying to convey here is the resource group is different than the resource group which is being used here while creating the firewall. That is why you cannot have different resource groups. Now let's choose the location as West US based on what was asked in the question. So now we have selected West US location and we are into RG1 resource group. These are the two key things that were mentioned. And probably let's name the firewall as AF1. It doesn't really matter because we are not trying to create the firewall, but we will choose the options. Now, if we go to virtual networks, you can see the options that we are getting is VNet 1 and VNet 4. And that's the reason why we are getting VNet 1 and VNet 4, because we are trying to create a Azure firewall in West US now, and VNet 1 and VNet 4 are hosted in West US location. Now let's first choose VNet 4. And if we choose VNet 4, we get the same error. Azure firewall cannot be used with from a different resource group. Again, a formatting error from Azure, but this error is self-explanatory that you cannot use a resource, basically a virtual network, which is not in the same resource group as the firewall. So let's now try to choose VNet 1, and you can see we now get the error that the virtual network must have a subnet named Azure Firewall subnet, which is a logical error because I have not created the subnet, but this pretty much explains or confirms that if you are trying to create a Azure firewall, your VNet should be in the same region and they should also be in the same resource group. Friends, if you still have any doubts in this question on why VNet 1 has been chosen as the correct answer, please do not forget to post them in the comment section. This is question number 226. You have an Azure App Service plan named ASP1. CPU usage for ASP1 is shown in the following exhibit. In front of you is an exhibit and you can see it is almost running at 100% CPU utilization. That's the first thing to note. And at the top, you can see local time last 30 days, automatic 6 hours. So basically the cycle that is used for refreshing is 6 hours. Let's now look at the next part of the question. Use the drop-down menus to select the answer choice that completes each statement based on the information presented in the graphic. The average CPU percentage is calculated once, 4 times, 6 times, or 24 times per day. And friends, at the top right hand side of the screenshot, you saw that the refresh was happening every 6 hours. And if we divide 24 by 6, that means the refresh is happening 4 times per day. Now the next part of the question is ASP1 must be, your options are scaled up, scaled down, scaled out to optimize CPU usage. And the correct answer here is scaled up because the CPU utilization was constantly at 100%. That's what we saw in the graph. That's why the ASP1 must be scaled up to optimize CPU usage. Question number 227. You purchase a new Azure subscription named Subscription 1. You create a virtual machine named VM1 in Subscription 1. VM1 is not protected by Azure Backup. You need to protect VM1 by using Azure Backup. Backups must be created at 1 and stored for 30 days. What should you do? And the first statement is location in which to store the backups. Your options are a blob container, a file share, a recovery services vault, a storage account. And friends, the correct answer here is a recovery services vault. And next part of the question is the object to use to configure the protection for VM1. And your options are a backup policy, a batch job, a batch schedule, a recovery plan. And the correct answer here would be a backup policy. Friends, if you have any doubts in this question, then please post them in the comment section. We have covered similar questions in previous parts of the series, so I'm not going to go in the detailed explanation, but if you are still having any doubts, please post them in the comment section. This is question number 228. You have a computer named Computer 1 that has a point-to-site VPN connection to an Azure virtual network named VNet1. The point-to-site connection uses a self-signed certificate. From Azure, you download and install the VPN client configuration package on a computer named Computer 2. You need to ensure that you can establish a point-to-site VPN connection to VNet1 from Computer 2. And the solution you give is you export the client certificate from Computer 1 and install the certificate on Computer 2. Does this meet the goal? You need to tell whether this is right or wrong. This is the correct solution, friends. You will need to export the client certificate from Computer 1 and install the certificate on Computer 2. Friends, we have had multiple variations of this question in the series till now. So you should know that in Azure Administrator exam, you get these type of questions where you are presented with a statement, a requirement, and then you are presented with multiple solutions. And you need to choose which of them is the right solution. Always remember, a question can have multiple solutions. So it is not mandatory that if you are getting 5 versions of this question, then only one solution will be correct and 4 will always be wrong. There can be a situation where 2 solutions are correct and 3 are wrong. Question number 229. You have an Azure subscription that contains 100 virtual machines. You regularly create and delete virtual machines. You need to identify unattached disks that can be deleted. What should you do? Your options are from Azure Cost Management, view cost analysis. From Azure Advisor, modify the advisor configuration. From Microsoft Azure Storage Explorer, view the account management properties. From Azure Cost Management, view advisor recommendations. And friends, the correct answer here is option D, from Azure Cost Management, view advisor recommendations. So friends, now I am on Microsoft documentation regarding cost recommendations from Azure Advisor. Let's go through the recommendations which are specific to compute, as one of those requirements or recommendations is what helps us answer the question. So the first recommendation related to compute that is provided by Azure Advisor is standard SSD disks billing caps. Customers running high input-output workloads in standard HDDs can upgrade to standard SSDs and benefit from better performance and SLA, and now experience a limit on the maximum number of build transactions. The second one is underutilized disks identified. You have disks that are utilized less than 10%, right size to save cost. Now, this is the third one, which is what has helped us in answering the question. You have disks that have not been attached to a VM for more than 30 days. Evaluate if you still need the disk. And the description that you see in this recommendation is we have observed that you have disks that haven't been attached to a VM for more than 30 days. Evaluate if you still need the disks. If you decide to delete the disks, recovery is not possible. We recommend that you create a snapshot before deletion or ensure the data in the disk is no longer required. Now, if you go to this document or this link, then it will tell you more about how to find the disks that are unattached and how to delete them. The next one is right size or shut down underutilized virtual machine scale sets. We have analyzed the usage pattern of your virtual machine scale sets over the past 7 days and identified virtual machine scale sets with low usage. While certain scenarios can result in low utilization by design, you can often save money by managing the size and the number of virtual machine scale sets. The next one is use virtual machines with ephemeral OS disk enabled to save cost and get better performance. With ephemeral OS disks, you get these benefits: save on storage cost for OS disk, get lower read-write latency to OS disks, faster VM reimage operation by resetting OS to its original state. It is preferable to use ephemeral OS disks for short-lived IaaS, which is infrastructure as a service VMs or VMs with stateless workloads. So friends, these are the recommendations that are provided by Azure Advisor when it comes to compute. Obviously, this document has many more recommendations that are provided by Azure Advisor when it comes to cost optimization. So you should be across these recommendations, because there can be multiple variations of this question. And if you get any such question, then if you have gone through this link, you will be able to answer that. Question number 230 of the series. You have the Azure virtual machines shown in the following table. You have 4 virtual machines with the name of VM1, VM2, VM3, VM4. VM1 is connected to virtual network VNet1, VM2 is connected to virtual network VNet2, and VM3 and VM4 are connected to virtual network VNet3. Their IP addresses are also on your screen. VNet1, VNet2, and VNet3 are paired. VM4 has a DNS server that is authoritative for a zone named contoso.com and contains the records shown in the following table. You have 2 records with the name of server 1 and server 2. Both of them are type A records. Server 1 is pointing to 131.107.3.3 and server 2 is pointing to 131.107.3.4. The virtual networks are configured to use the DNS server shown in the following table. You have basically 3 virtual networks, which you already know. Virtual network 1 is using the default Azure provided DNS server. Virtual network 2 is using a custom, and virtual network 3 is also using a custom DNS server. Let's now look at the next part of the question. For each of the following statements, select yes if the statement is true, otherwise select no. And the first statement is, from VM1, server1.contoso.com resolves to 131.107.3.3. Friends, VM1 is connected to VNet1, which has default Azure provided DNS server and is linked to Azure private DNS server contoso.com, which is 131.107.3.3 and 131.107.3.4 DNS servers. That means VM1 has 2 DNS servers for resolving. DNS servers for VNet1 server 1.contoso.com is 131.107.3.3 and for server 2.contoso.com is 131.107.3.4, making this statement as correct. And the next statement is, from VM2, server 1.contoso.com resolves to 131.107.3.3, and this statement is incorrect. VM2 belongs to VNet2, which has custom DNS of 192.168.0.5, which is IP of VM4, and it does not take the default Azure specified DNS. So VM2 will resolve from VM4 as server 1.contoso.com, which is 131.107.2.3, and server 2.contoso.com, which is 131.107.2.4. Question number 231. You have an Azure subscription that contains a storage account. The account stores website data. You need to ensure that inbound user traffic uses the Microsoft point of presence (POP) closest to user's location. What should you configure? And your options are private endpoints, Azure firewall rules, routing preference, load balancing. And the correct answer here is option C, routing preference. So friends, now I am on official Microsoft documentation which explains the differences between Microsoft Global Network and Internet routing. By default, client outside of the Azure environment access your storage account over the Microsoft Global Network. The Microsoft Global Network is optimized for low latency path selection to deliver premium network performance with high reliability. Both inbound and outbound traffic are routed through the point of presence that is closest to the client. This default routing configuration ensures that traffic to and from your storage account traverses over the Microsoft Global Network for the bulk of its path, maximizing network performance. This is the reason, friends, we have chosen option C, which is routing performance, as the correct answer. You can change the routing configuration for your storage account so that both inbound and outbound traffic are routed to and from clients outside of the Azure environment through the POP closest to the storage account. This route minimizes the traversal of your traffic over the Microsoft Global Network, handing it off the transit ISP at the earliest opportunity. Utilizing this routing configuration lowers networking cost. You have an Azure subscription that contains an Azure virtual machine named VM1. VM1 runs a financial reporting app named App1 that does not support multiple active instances. At the end of each month, CPU usage for VM1 peaks when App1 runs. You need to create a scheduled runbook to increase the processor performance of VM1 at the end of each month. What task should you include in the runbook? And your options are: add the Azure Performance Diagnostic Agent to VM1, modify the VM size property of VM1, add VM1 to a scale set, increase the vCPU quota for the subscription, add a desired state configuration extension to VM1. And friends, the correct answer here is option B, modify the VM size property of VM1. Let's head to official Microsoft documentation to understand the reason behind choosing option B as the correct choice here. So friends, based on the question statement, the CPU usage for VM1 peaks when App1 runs. And the option that we chose was modify the VM size property of VM1. Now in front of you is the official Microsoft documentation specifying the different type of virtual machine sizes available in Azure. If you scroll through this table, there are certain sizes which are for general purpose. Then there are compute optimized, memory optimized, storage optimized, GPU and high performance compute. Now, based on your requirement, you can choose which type of size you want for your virtual machine. Now, in this case, because the App1 basically is running into a CPU crunch, so you could use a compute optimized VM here. And based on its description, you can see high CPU to memory ratio, good for medium traffic web servers, network appliances, batch processes, and application servers. And the sizes that are available are F, FS, FSV2, and FX. So that is the reason we have chosen option B to modify the VM size and use a compute optimized size, which is best suited for this requirement. Now, if the question was talking about of memory crunch, then maybe you would have used a memory optimized VM. Or if it was related to storage, then you would have used a storage optimized, but ultimately the answer still remains same. You need to modify the VM size property of VM1. Question number 233. You have an Azure subscription that contains a storage account named Storage1 in the North Europe Azure region. You need to ensure that when blob data is added to Storage1, a secondary copy is created in the East US region. The solution must minimize administrative effort. What should you configure? And your options are operational backup, object replication, geo-redundant storage, a lifecycle management rule. And friends, the correct answer here is option B, object replication. You might be tempted to choose GRS here, friends, but it doesn't give you option to choose the destination region location. Rather, the copy in GRS happens to the dedicated region pair of the source region. Let's, as always, head to Azure portal to try and validate this scenario. So friends, to mimic the scenario given in the question, what I have done is I have already created two storage accounts. One is with the name of source storage account 1989, which is in North Europe region as per the question statement. Then I have also created a storage account which is named as destination storage 1989, which is in East US region. This is to replicate the blobs from source storage account to destination storage account while ensuring the location that are given in the question remains same. So in the source storage account, what I have done is I have created a container named source storage, which you will just see. So the container name is source container, and in that container there is nothing uploaded at this point. Similarly, if we go to the destination storage, then I have also created a container there because this is the destination container where the blobs will get copied, and it is with the name of destination container. Now to set up object replication, what we will do is we will go to the storage account. Under the object replication option, you can see I have already set up replication. Basically what I've done is while setting up the replication, I have chosen that the replication needs to happen to destination storage 1989 storage account, and the blobs that are getting copied are from source container to the destination container in the destination storage account. Now what we will do is to test this theory, what we are going to do is now we are going to go to the container and the source container and try to upload a blob and see whether it shows up in the destination container or not. At the moment, we have already verified that the source and destination both are empty. Let's click on upload and select a blob. So I'm just going to upload an image here, which should be uploaded in few seconds, and the upload has got finished. You can see the JPG file is there in the source container. It is using the hot access tier and the blob type is block blob. Let's now head to destination container and see whether the blob has got copied or not. So what we'll do is again, we'll go into the containers. We will choose the destination container, and there should be the image that should show up pretty soon. So when you copy the, when you upload the blob in the source container, it takes few seconds for the sync to happen. So just give it some time and the blob should show up in the destination container. So it took almost 3 minutes for the blob to show up in the destination container, but we can see the same image is now showing up in the destination container. This is how we have used object replication to replicate the objects in the desired destinations as mentioned in the question. I hope you now understand why GRS is not the right answer here, because you do not get to choose in which location you want to replicate your objects to. Now let's try one more scenario here. Basically, let's try to delete the blob from the source container and see whether it gets deleted from the destination container as well. So we just click delete and the blob has got deleted. Let's now head to the destination container and see whether it gets deleted from the destination container as well or not, because we are talking about replication here. So the sync should be maintained and the state should be same on both source and destination. So this has not got deleted till now from here, because obviously you would have already seen that the sync took a bit of time when the file was uploaded. So same thing is going to happen when it is going to get deleted. So let's give it few minutes and then we will hit to try refresh. So friends, it took almost 1.5 minutes for it to be deleted from the destination container, but the bottom line is it has got deleted and source and destination are in sync. So Yeah, that's all I wanted to show in this demo. Let's now head back to the questions. This is question number 234. You have an Azure subscription that contains a virtual machine named VM1 and an Azure function named app1. You need to create an alert rule that will run app1 if VM1 stops. What should you create for the alert rule? Your options are an application security group, a security group that has dynamic device membership, an action group, an application group. And friends, the correct answer here is option C, an action group. An action group is a collection of actions that are triggered by an Azure alert. In this scenario, you need to create an alert rule that will run app1 if VM1 stops. And for this purpose, you need to create an action group. An action group defines the set of actions to be taken when an alert is triggered, such as running an Azure function, sending an email, or creating an Azure ticket. By creating an action group and associating it with the alert rule, you can automate the process of running app1 if VM1 stops without the need of manual intervention. This helps ensure that critical systems such as app1 are automatically activated when necessary, improving the overall reliability and availability of your Azure services. Question number 235. You have an Azure subscription that contains an Azure Stream Analytics job named Job1. You need to monitor input events for Job1 to identify the number of events that were not processed. Which metric should you use? Your options are out of order events, output events, late input events, backlogged input events. And the correct answer here is option D, backlogged input events. So friends, these are some of the metrics available for Stream Analytics, and the first one is backlogged input events, which was the correct answer for our use case, and the definition of it is number of input events that are backlogged. A non-zero value for this metric implies that your job can't keep up with the number of incoming events. If this value is slowly increasing or is consistently non-zero, you should scale out your job. And then the other metrics available are data conversion errors, CPU utilization, which is currently in preview. Then you have early input events. Then you have failed function requests, function events, function requests, input deserialization errors, input event bytes, input events, input sources received, late input events, which was one of our options, then out of order events, which was again one of our options, and then output events, runtime errors, SU memory percentage utilization, and watermark delay. Folks, if you are interested in knowing more about the metrics that are available from Stream Analytics, then I would highly recommend you to go through this article and understand what all metrics are available, as there can be different variations of this question and you will be well prepared to answer those. Question number 236. You have an Azure subscription named Sub1 that contains the resources shown in the following table. You have two resources with the name of RG1 and Action1. RG1 is a resource group type and Action1 is an action group that sends an email message to admin1@contoso.com. Now Sub1, which is your subscription, contains the following alert rule. Its name is Alert1. Its scope is all resource group in Sub1 and it includes all future resources as well. Condition is all administrative operations and action is Action1. Now Sub1 contains the following alert processing rule. Its name is Rule 1. Again, scope is Sub1. Rule type is suppress notifications, and apply the rule is set to on a specified time, and the time frame is August 10, 2022 to August 13, 2022. Friends, before looking at next part of the question, let's understand the difference between alert rule and alert processing rule, as that is very important to answer this question. Alert processing rules allow you to apply processing on fired alerts. Alert processing rules are different from alert rules. Alert rules generate new alerts, while alert processing rules modify the fired alerts as they are being fired. You can use alert processing rules to add action groups or remove or suppress action groups from your fired alerts. You can apply alert processing rules to different resource scopes from a single resource or to an entire subscription as long as they are within the same subscription as the alert processing rule. You can also use them to apply various filters or have the rule work on a predefined schedule. Some common use cases for alert processing rules are described here. Basically, suppress notifications during planned maintenance. This is what we are trying to do in our use case, where we are suppressing alerts between August 10, 2022 to August 13, 2022. Friends, now that we know what is the difference between alert rule and alert processing rule, let's look at next part of this question. For each of the following statements, select yes if the statement is true, otherwise select no. And the first statement is, if you create a resource group in sub 1 on August 11th, 2022, alert 1 is listed in the Azure portal. This statement is correct. Even though August 11, 2022 falls between the time range where the alerts are suppressed, but the statement is talking about alert 1 is listed in the Azure portal. Alert will still be listed, but it is suppressed. What does it mean? The email notification that was supposed to be sent to admin1@contoso.com will not be sent. Now the second statement is, if you create a resource group in sub 1 on August 12, 2022, an email message is sent to admin1@contoso.com. This statement is incorrect because here we are talking about an alert being sent, and August 12 lies between August 11 and August 13. So this alert will be suppressed and there will be no email that will be generated. Let's look at third statement. If you add a tag to RG1 on August 15, 2022, an email message is sent to admin1@contoso.com. 15th August falls outside the time range for which alerts are suppressed. So yes, an email will be sent to admin1@contoso.com in this case. Folks, if you still have any doubts in all the three statements, why they were chosen as right or wrong, please post them in the comment section and I'll try to address them as soon as possible. Question number 237. You have an Azure subscription that has traffic analytics configured. You deploy a new virtual machine named VM1 that has the following settings. Region is East US, virtual network is VNet1, NIC security group, which is network security group, is NSG1. You need to monitor VM1 traffic by using traffic analytics. Which settings should you configure? Your options are diagnostic settings for VM1, NSG flow logs for NSG1, diagnostic settings for NSG1, insights for VM1. And the correct answer here is option B, NSG flow logs for NSG1. NSG flow logs are a feature of Azure Network Watcher that allows logging of information about IP traffic flowing through a network security group. This data can be used by traffic analytics to analyze network traffic in your environment. By enabling NSG flow logs for NSG1, the network security group associated with the VM1, you would be able to monitor the traffic of VM1 using traffic analytics. Friends, let's look at question number 238. You have an Azure subscription that contains a virtual machine scale set. The scale set contains 4 instances that have the following configurations. Operating system is Windows Server 2019. Size is standard _D1_V2. You run the get-AZVMSSS commandlet as shown in the following exhibit. Now there are 2 commands that are being executed. One is more focused around virtual machine profile, OS profile, and the second one is more focused around upgrade policy. Let's look at next part of this question. Use the drop-down menus to select the answer choice that completes each statement based on the information presented in the graphic which you saw on the previous screen. When an administrator changes the virtual machine size, the size will be changed on up to how many virtual machines simultaneously, and your options are 0, 1, 2, and 4. Friends, if you resize the scale set, all the VMs get resized at once. And this virtual machine scale set has 4 instances. So 4 is the correct answer choice here. Both the commandlet outputs given in the question are irrelevant to this statement. Now the next statement is, when a new build of the Windows Server 2019 image is released, the new build will be deployed to up to how many virtual machines simultaneously? Again, your options are 0, 1, 2, and 4. Now friends, from the second commandlet output, you can see that the OS image upgrades are set to automatic. And to minimize the application downtime, upgrades take place in batches with no more than 20% of a scale set upgrading at the same time. That means 20% of 4 is 0.8, so a maximum of 1 VM will be updated with the new build at a time. Friends, before we look at question number 239, if you are someone who is short on time and wants to get access to the PDF version of these questions, then do not forget to take the gold membership of the channel and email me at devopshub2023@gmail.com requesting the PDF copy. Question number 239. You plan to create an Azure storage account named Storage1 that will contain a file share named Share1. You need to ensure that Share1 can support SMB multi-channel. The solution must minimize costs. How should you configure storage? And your options are premium performance with locally redundant storage, standard performance with zone redundant storage, premium performance with geo-redundant storage, standard performance with locally redundant storage. And folks, the correct answer here is option A, premium performance with locally redundant storage. Let's head to Azure documentation to understand the reasons behind choosing this option as the correct choice. So friends, this is the documentation to improve SMB Azure file share performance. And now we are going to go through a table which is on your screen right now. And in the table, you can see for SMB, only one of the option is supported, which says premium file shares, file storage, and then the redundancy is LRS or ZRS. Now, based on this, there are 2 options that could be correct in our use case. The first one is premium performance with locally redundant storage, and the third one, which is option C, premium performance with geo-redundant storage. But we have chosen option A, premium performance with locally redundant storage, as the correct choice because the question also mentions that the solution must minimize cost. Thanks for sticking with us through the entire video. If you haven't explored the other parts of the series yet, go check them out for even more value. You will find the playlist link in the description below. If you passed the Azure Administrator exam with our help, tag us in your LinkedIn celebration posts and share our content with your network. Stay tuned for the next part in the series. More great content is on the way.